They said she was cursed, too Indian for the whites, too white for her tribe. 3 men had rejected her at the altar, each one spitting the same poison. Half-breed. Now, standing alone on that frozen Montana platform in 1883, watching families reunite while she clutched a letter from a man who never came, Abigail Cross knew the truth. She was the bride nobody wanted. Until a golden-haired child whispered 6 words that would shatter everything. "Can you be my mommy forever?" Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train's whistle cut through the February air like a knife through skin, sharp and unforgiving. Abigail Cross stood on the platform of Timber Ridge Station, Montana Territory, her gloved hands trembling around a letter she'd read so many times the creases had begun to split. The paper was soft as cloth now. The ink faded from her fingers, tracing over the words again and again during the 3-day journey from St. Louis. Dear Miss Cross, I am a man of simple means seeking a woman of good character. If you are willing to make the journey west, I will provide a home, security, and the respect due a wife. I ask only for companionship and honest work. Yours in faith, Samuel Garrett. Simple words, clean words. Words that had given her hope when hope had become a luxury she could no longer afford. But Samuel Garrett wasn't here. Around her, the platform erupted with life. A woman in a burgundy traveling suit fell into the arms of a barrel-chested man who spun her around, both of them laughing. 2 children shrieked with delight as their father scooped them up, one under each arm. An elderly couple embraced, the man's hat falling to the ground, neither of them caring. Even the porter was smiling, hauling trunks and calling out names, connecting people to people, reuniting what had been separated. Everyone had someone, everyone except her. Abigail pulled her worn shawl tighter, the one her mother had woven 15 years ago, before the fever took her, before Abigail understood what it meant to be caught between 2 worlds. The shawl was Kiowa work, intricate patterns in indigo and cream, and she'd debated leaving it behind. But it was all she had left of her mother's hands, her mother's songs, her mother's world, a world that had rejected her just as thoroughly as her father's. "Excuse me, miss." The station master approached, his weathered face apologetic. "I'm closing up. You'll need to clear the platform." "I'm waiting for someone." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Mr. Samuel Garrett. He was supposed to meet me." The station master's expression shifted, just slightly, but she'd learned to read these micro-movements over the years. The way eyes flickered away, the way lips pressed together, the way shoulders turned as if preparing to retreat. "Samuel Garrett," he repeated slowly. "You're the mail-order bride." "I am." She lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze. She'd learned that too, never look down. Looking down meant shame, and she'd swallowed enough shame to last 3 lifetimes. The station master removed his cap, worrying the brim between his fingers. "Miss, Samuel left town 2 days ago. Took the northbound stage." The words didn't land immediately. They seemed to hover in the air between them, like snow that hadn't decided whether to fall. "Left?" she echoed. "Yes, miss. I'm real sorry." He glanced around the emptying platform, uncomfortable. Maybe there was a misunderstanding or an emergency with his family back east? But Abigail knew there had been no misunderstanding. She'd seen the way his letters had changed in those final weeks. Shorter, less detailed, the handwriting rushed. And then the last letter, the one that had arrived just before she'd left St. Louis, forwarded to her boarding house 3 days too late to stop her journey. "I must regretfully inform you that circumstances have changed. I wish you well in your future endeavors." No explanation. No apology. Just erasure. She'd crumpled that letter and thrown it in the boarding house stove, watching it curl and blacken. She'd already burned her bridges, spent her last savings on the train ticket, said goodbye to the only people in St. Louis who'd tolerated her presence. There had been no future to return to, so she'd gotten on that train anyway, clinging to the original letter like a promise that might somehow still be kept. "Miss?" The station master was still watching her, pity now plain on his face. "Do you have somewhere to go? Family in town?" "No." The word came out hollow. Perhaps the boarding house. I have 73 cents. She said it flatly, without emotion. Emotion was expensive. I don't think that will cover lodging. The station master winced. Behind him, the last family cleared the platform, their laughter fading into the dusk. The temperature was dropping fast. She could see her breath now, small clouds of evidence that she was still here, still breathing, still unwanted. There's a church, he offered weakly. Reverend Patterson might. Thank you. Abigail cut him off gently. She'd dealt with enough charity, enough pitying reverends who wanted to save her soul while their congregations whispered about her blood. I'll manage. The lie tasted familiar. The station master nodded, clearly relieved to be released from this uncomfortable duty. I'll leave the waiting room unlocked tonight. It's not much, but it's warm. Just don't let anyone see you there, understand? I could get in trouble. I understand. Because of course she did. She always understood. The world had been teaching her the same lesson since birth. You don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere. The station master disappeared into his office, and then she was alone. Truly, completely alone. Abigail sank onto the wooden bench, her carpetbag, containing everything she owned, pressed against her legs. The platform was empty now, shadows lengthening as the sun dropped behind the mountains. Beautiful mountains, she noted distantly. Purple and gold, crowned with snow. Montana was beautiful, she'd give it that much. Cold but beautiful. The wind picked up, carrying voices from the town beyond the station. Saturday evening sounds. Families settling in for supper, stores closing, life happening for people who had a place in it. She closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. She'd prayed in St. Louis when Thomas Whitmore had taken one look at her on their wedding day and announced he couldn't marry a squaw. She'd prayed in Kansas City when William Thorpe's mother had spat at her feet and called her an abomination. She'd prayed in Denver when Christopher Mills had simply never shown up, leaving her stranded for 3 days before a kind shopkeeper told her the truth. Mills had seen her from across the street, noted her dark hair and copper skin, and caught the next train east. 3 rejections. 3 humiliations. 3 times she'd stood in a dress that wasn't quite white, because true white was for pure brides, and everyone knew she wasn't pure, couldn't be pure, not with that blood, and waited for men who'd decided sight unseen that she wasn't worth keeping. And now Samuel Garrett. The 4th rejection, though at least he'd had the decency to flee before she'd had to endure another public refusal. Small mercies. Maybe there's something wrong with me, she thought, not for the first time. Maybe they can smell it on me, the unwantedness. Maybe I carry it like a disease. Her father had been a Scottish trapper who'd stayed with her mother's Kiowa band for 2 years before disappearing into the wilderness, leaving behind a pregnant woman and promises that turned out to be worthless. Her mother had loved him anyway, had named her baby girl Abigail because he'd said it was his mother's name, had taught that baby to speak English alongside Kiowa because she believed, somehow, despite everything, that her daughter would need both languages to survive. And she'd been right. Abigail had needed both languages, both worlds, and had been denied full entry to either. The Kiowa had called her White Bird, beautiful but not quite right, never quite fitting with the flock. The white world had called her worse, half-breed, mongrel, savage, stain. She opened her eyes, staring at the train tracks that stretched east and west, iron lines connecting everywhere that wasn't here. For a moment, just a moment, she considered using her remaining money to buy passage back east. But passage to where? To what? The boarding house that had tolerated her only because she paid in advance? The sewing shop that had let her work in the back room, hidden from customers who might object to being served by someone like her? No. There was nothing back there except more of the same. At least here, in this frozen Montana nowhere, the humiliation was fresh. She hadn't yet accumulated layers of shame in this place, hadn't yet learned which streets to avoid, which shops to not enter, which families to keep her eyes down around. The door to the waiting room was unlocked, as promised. Abigail picked up her carpetbag and was about to head inside when she heard it, a small sound, almost lost in the wind. Crying. She turned, scanning the platform. Nothing. The shadows were deep now, the sun fully set. Maybe she'd imagined it. God knew her mind was there. Behind the water tower, a small figure huddled against the wood. Abigail moved without thinking, her own misery temporarily forgotten. As she approached, the figure resolved into a child, a little girl, no more than 5 or 6, with golden curls escaping from beneath a knitted cap. She was crying softly, her small body shaking with cold, or fear, or both. "Hello," Abigail said gently, crouching down a few feet away. She'd learned not to approach children too quickly. Their parents had usually already taught them to be afraid of people who looked like her. "Are you lost?" The child looked up, tears streaming down her round cheeks. In the dim light, Abigail could see her face was flushed, her eyes fever bright. "I can't find Papa," she whispered. "He told me to wait by the feed store, but I couldn't remember which building and it got dark and—" A sob cut off her words. "Shh, it's all right." Abigail kept her voice soft, non-threatening. "Your Papa is probably looking for you right now. What's your name?" "June." The little girl wiped her nose with her sleeve. "June Harper. That's a beautiful name. I'm Abigail." She smiled, though her face felt stiff from cold and unshed tears. "June like the month?" A tiny nod. "My favorite month," Abigail said. It wasn't, but the child didn't need to know that. "June, does your Papa work in town?" "We live outside town, at the ranch. But Papa had to come sell the horses, and I wanted to come too and see the train, and—" Another sob. "I got confused." Abigail's heart twisted. This child was lost and frightened, and somewhere a father was probably losing his mind searching for his daughter. She knew she should take the girl to the sheriff's office or find the station master, but something kept her there, crouched in the shadows beside this crying child. Maybe it was because June hadn't flinched away from her, hadn't looked at her dark hair or her copper-toned skin and learned fear, hadn't been taught yet that Abigail Cross was someone to avoid. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in months, years, Abigail felt useful, needed, like she had a purpose beyond simply surviving rejection after rejection. "Are you hurt?" June asked suddenly, her tear-bright eyes focusing on Abigail's face. "You look sad." The observation was so direct, so innocent, that Abigail felt something crack inside her chest. "Just a little sad," she managed, "but I'm okay." June studied her with the intensity only children possess, that ability to see straight through adult pretenses to the truth beneath. Then she reached out one small hand and touched Abigail's cheek, her fingers warm against Abigail's cold skin. "Don't be sad," June whispered. "When I'm sad, Papa says the sadness goes away if I help somebody else feel better." Abigail's eyes burned. This child, lost and scared herself, trying to comfort a stranger. "That's very wise," she said, her voice rough. "Your Papa sounds like a good man." "He is." June's lip trembled again. "But I can't find him, and I'm scared," and her small body swayed slightly. Alarm shot through Abigail. She reached out, steadying the child. "June, are you feeling all right? You're very warm." "I'm sleepy." June's eyes were starting to droop. "And my head hurts." Fever. The child had a fever, and she was out here in the cold, lost and alone. Abigail made a decision. "Come here, sweetheart." She opened her arms, and June, this child who should have been taught to fear her, stumbled forward into them without hesitation. The trust shattered something in Abigail. She held this small, warm body close, feeling June's arms wrap around her neck, and for a moment, just a moment, she understood what it might be like to be needed, to be wanted, to be someone's safe place. "My mama went away," June murmured against Abigail's shoulder. "Papa says she's in heaven now. Are you a mama?" The question hit like a physical blow. "No, sweetheart, I'm not." "Oh." A pause, and then, so softly Abigail almost missed it. "Would you want to be?" Abigail's throat closed. She thought of all the dreams she'd had, the ones she'd carefully folded away like linens she'd never get to use. Dreams of a home, children, a place where she belonged, dreams that men like Samuel Garrett had taken from her, one rejection at a time. Before she could answer, a voice rang out across the platform, deep, rough, edged with panic. "June!" The child stirred in Abigail's arms. "Papa?" June, where are you? The voice was closer now, and Abigail could hear running footsteps. Your papa's here, Abigail whispered, relief flooding through her. You're safe now. She stood, still holding June, and stepped out from behind the water tower into the dim glow of the platform's single lamp. A man was running toward them, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of desperate speed that only a terrified parent can manage. He stopped short when he saw them, his chest heaving, his face a mask of fear and relief. June. The word was somewhere between a prayer and a sob. Papa! June reached for him, and Abigail handed the child over, watching as this man, this stranger, clutched his daughter like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. I'm sorry, Papa, June was crying. I got lost and it was dark and… Shh, baby girl, you're safe now. He held her tight, his large hands cradling her small body with infinite gentleness. Then his eyes met Abigail's over June's head, and she saw them widen slightly. Here it comes, she thought, the recognition, the judgment, the moment when he realizes his daughter was in the arms of a half-breed and feels compelled to say something cutting about it. But he surprised her. Thank you. The words were simple, genuine. I've been searching for half an hour. I thought… His voice broke. Thank you. She's running a fever, Abigail said quietly, focusing on what mattered. Not dangerously high yet, but she needs to get warm and rest. The man's face went pale. He pressed his palm to June's forehead and cursed softly. The fever. Christ, not again. Fear flickered across his face, deep, old fear that spoke of previous loss. June stirred in his arms, her small voice sleepy but insistent. Papa, the lady is sad, and she's cold. Can she come home with us? June, you can't just… He stopped, seeming to really look at Abigail for the first time. She saw his gaze take in her worn traveling dress, her thin shawl, her carpet bag sitting on the platform where she'd dropped it. His eyes were sharp, assessing, but not unkind. I don't need charity, Abigail said quickly, lifting her chin. Pride was all she had left. Thank you, but I'll be fine. Papa, please. June's voice was plaintive, feverish. She helped me, and she's all alone. Mama wouldn't want her to be alone. Something shifted in the man's face at the mention of Mama, pain, raw and recent. He looked at his daughter, then at Abigail, then at the empty platform behind her. Were you waiting for someone? He asked. The question was too close to the wound. I was, Abigail said stiffly. It appears they had other plans. Understanding flickered in his eyes. A husband? A potential husband. Mail order arrangement. She said it flatly, daring him to comment, to judge. Obviously, it didn't work out. He was quiet for a moment, and Abigail braced herself for pity or scorn. She wasn't sure which would be worse. But when he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Do you have family in the territory? No? Friends? No. Money for lodging? She almost laughed. 73 cents. He winced. June was starting to shiver in his arms, and he made a decision. I can't leave you here, he said simply. My ranch is an hour's ride north. There's a spare room, a bed, a fire. You're welcome to stay the night, at least until you figure out your next move. He paused, then added quietly, I'm Eli Harper. This is my daughter June. Abigail Cross. She hesitated, suspicion warring with desperation. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Eli shifted June's weight in his arms, his expression unreadable in the shadows. You helped my daughter when you could have walked past her. You're stranded in a town you don't know, with no money and no prospects. And… He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. Let's just say I know what it's like to be judged for things you can't control. There was a story there. Abigail could hear it in the rough edges of his voice. But June was shivering harder now, and the night was getting colder, and Abigail's own body was starting to shake from the cold and the emotional exhaustion of the day. Just for tonight, Eli said again. Tomorrow, you can decide what comes next, but I can't in good conscience leave you here to freeze. Abigail looked at him, really looked. He was older than she'd first thought, maybe mid-30s, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sun and too much worry. His coat was worn but clean, his boots scuffed but well-maintained. Working man's hands, a working man's bearing, and his eyes, when they met hers, held no malice, no judgment, just weariness, the kind that matched her own. "Can you be my mommy?" June's voice drifted up, fever soft and drowsy. "Just for tonight?" Eli's jaw tightened. "June, you can't just—" "It's all right," Abigail heard herself say. "Yes, sweetheart, just for tonight." She didn't know what made her say it. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the way this child had looked at her without fear, without judgment, and asked if she was hurt. Maybe it was because she had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. Or maybe it was because for the first time since stepping off that train, someone had looked at her and seen a person worth helping instead of a problem to avoid. Eli nodded once, accepting her decision. "My wagon's behind the mercantile. Can you walk?" "I can walk." Abigail picked up her carpet bag, the weight of her entire life suddenly seeming very light. They moved through the empty town, Eli carrying June, Abigail walking beside them. The streets were quiet now, Saturday evening having given way to Saturday night. Lamps glowed in windows, smoke rose from chimneys, families gathered around tables and hearths. All the normal things that normal people did. Abigail had never been normal. The wagon was simple but sturdy, pulled by 2 horses that stamped impatiently in the cold. Eli settled June in the back on a bed of blankets, then helped Abigail up. His hand was warm, calloused, steady. He didn't flinch when he touched her, didn't pull away like she carried some contagion. Small things. She'd learned to be grateful for small things. "There are more blankets back there," Eli said as he climbed into the driver's seat. "Wrap up. It's a cold ride." Abigail did as instructed, tucking blankets around June first, then herself. The child was burning up now, mumbling in her sleep, and Abigail felt her healer's instinct kick in, the knowledge her mother had passed down, plant by plant, cure by cure. She pressed her hand to June's forehead, gauging the fever's intensity. "How long has she been sick?" Abigail asked as the wagon lurched into motion. "She wasn't sick this morning." Eli's voice was tight with worry. "Just complained her throat hurt. I shouldn't have brought her to town, but she begged, and I—" He stopped. "I can't say no to her." "Children spike fevers fast," Abigail said, trying to sound reassuring. "It might be nothing, but if you have yarrow or elderflower at the house, I can make a tea that will help." He glanced back at her, his eyes unreadable in the darkness. "You know healing?" "My mother was a healer, Kiowa medicine." She waited for the reaction, the stiffening, the doubt, the suggestion that perhaps white medicine would be better. But Eli just nodded. He stopped, started again. "I've seen native medicine work when white medicine failed. If you can help her, I'd be grateful." The wagon rolled north, out of town, and into the vast darkness of the Montana Territory. Above them, stars emerged in their thousands, so bright and numerous they seemed unreal. Abigail had forgotten how dark the night could be outside cities, how large the sky. June whimpered in her sleep, and Abigail gathered the child close, sharing warmth. The little girl curled into her instinctively, her hot face pressed against Abigail's chest. It should have been uncomfortable, should have been awkward, this stranger's child using her body for comfort. But instead, it felt right, like something clicking into place, like a key finding its lock. "She doesn't usually take to strangers," Eli said quietly, his eyes on the road. "Not since her mother died." There it was again, that pain, that loss. "How long?" Abigail asked softly. 8 months. Fever took her quick. One day she was fine, the next— His hands tightened on the reins. 3 days later, she was gone. "I'm sorry." "Yeah." A long pause. "Yeah. Me too." They rode in silence after that. The only sounds, the creak of the wagon, the horse's steady breathing, and June's soft whimpering. Abigail watched the landscape roll past, dark shapes of hills and trees, the occasional glow of a distant homestead, the endless stretch of empty land. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. So much space, so much emptiness. A person could disappear out here and never be found. The thought should have been frightening. Instead, it was almost comforting. Maybe that was what she needed, to disappear into all this emptiness, to stop trying to fit into spaces that didn't want her, to just be. "Can I ask you something?" Eli's voice broke the silence. "All right." "Why mail order?" He asked it carefully, like he was aware it might be invasive. "Woman like you, educated, speaks well, obviously has skills. Why not find a husband the traditional way?" Abigail almost laughed. "I tried 3 times. Each one took one look at me and decided I wasn't what they wanted." "Because of your blood?" It wasn't a question. "Because of my blood." She said it matter-of-factly, the way you might describe the weather. "My father was Scottish, my mother Kiowa. That makes me unacceptable to both worlds." Eli was quiet for a long moment, then, "My wife was Comanche, full blood. I loved her anyway, married her anyway." His voice went hard. "There are people in Timber Ridge who made sure I knew every day what they thought of that." Abigail's breath caught. That explained the lack of judgment, the immediate willingness to help. He understood. Not perfectly. He'd never know what it was like to carry this divide in her own body, to be the living proof of 2 worlds colliding. But he understood enough. "Did they—" She hesitated. "Did they hurt her?" "They tried." His voice was flat, dangerous. "I made sure they regretted it." Another silence, but this one felt different. Less awkward, more shared. Like they'd acknowledged something true about the world and their place in it. "Why are you helping me?" Abigail asked. "Really?" Eli didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was rough with something that might have been guilt. "Because I couldn't save my wife from the fever. Couldn't protect her from the hate. But maybe I can keep one woman from freezing to death on a train platform because the world decided she wasn't worth keeping." The honesty of it struck Abigail silent. She held June closer, this stranger's child, and felt the little girl's heartbeat against her own. Steady, strong, alive. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli nodded once, accepting her gratitude. "The ranch is just ahead." The cabin emerged from the darkness like something from a dream, small, solid, with light glowing in one window. It sat in a hollow beneath tall pines, protected from the worst of the wind. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of wood smoke, and something else, sage maybe, or cedar. Home smells. The kind Abigail had almost forgotten existed. Eli stopped the wagon and jumped down, moving quickly to help Abigail with June. The child was burning up now, her small face flushed, her breathing rapid and shallow. Abigail's healer's instinct kicked into high alert. "Get her inside," she said. "I need hot water, clean cloths, and any herbs you have, especially willow bark or feverfew." Eli didn't question her. He simply scooped June into his arms and headed for the cabin, Abigail following close behind with her carpet bag. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. One main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a handmade table and chairs. 2 doors led to what must be bedrooms. The fire was banked but still warm, casting golden light across rough-hewn floors. And there, near the hearth, hanging on a wooden peg, a small beaded dress. Intricate work, beautiful patterns in red and black and white. The kind of dress a mother would make for a daughter. The kind of dress that spoke of love and time and hands that would never create again. Abigail's eyes caught on another detail. A small turquoise charm on the mantel, the kind Comanche women wore for protection. The ghosts in this house weren't metaphorical. They were real, present, woven into every corner. "Back bedroom," Eli was saying, carrying June through one of the doors. Abigail followed, finding a small room with a narrow bed, a simple dresser, a window overlooking the dark pines. Eli laid June on the bed, his large hands gentle, his face tight with fear. "I need that water," Abigail said, setting down her bag and kneeling beside the bed. "And light. As much light as you can give me." Eli moved immediately, lighting lamps, stoking the fire, filling a pot with water. He moved with the efficiency of a man used to working alone, used to handling crisis without help. Within minutes, the room was bright and warm, and Abigail had hot water to work with. "Herbs?" she asked, not looking up from June as she stripped off the child's outer layers, checking her skin for rashes or signs of worse illness. "In the kitchen, top shelf, left side, He stopped. Wina kept them, labeled in English and Comanche both. Abigail looked up sharply. "Your wife was a healer?" "She knew plants, knew cures." His jaw worked. "Didn't help her in the end." "A fever is cruel," Abigail said softly. "Sometimes even the best healers can't stop it. Find what you need. Tell me what to do." Abigail stood, moving quickly to the kitchen. The herbs were exactly where Eli said they'd be. Small bundles hanging from pegs, dried flowers in clay pots, roots wrapped in cloth. She recognized most of them immediately, her mother's teachings coming back like muscle memory. Yarrow for fever, elderflower for inflammation, mint for nausea, willow bark for pain, and there, in careful handwriting on each bundle, the names in both English and Comanche. This woman, this Wina, had been teaching someone, preserving knowledge, making sure it wouldn't die with her. Abigail's throat tightened. She grabbed what she needed and returned to the bedroom where Eli was sitting beside June, holding the child's small hand in his large one. June was tossing restlessly, mumbling words Abigail couldn't make out. "Boil this," Abigail instructed, handing Eli a mixture of herbs. "When it's ready, strain it and bring it to me. Then I need clean cloths and a basin of cool, not cold water." Eli moved and Abigail settled beside June, pressing her hand to the child's forehead, feeling the heat radiating from her small body. The fever was high, but not dangerously so. Not yet. But it could spike fast, especially in the night. "You're going to be all right, sweetheart," Abigail murmured, smoothing back June's sweat-dampened curls. "I'm going to help you feel better." June's eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever but focusing on Abigail's face. "Mommy?" The word was barely a whisper. Abigail's heart clenched. "I'm here, June. Rest now. Don't leave." June's small hand gripped Abigail's with surprising strength. "Please don't leave like Mama did." "I'm right here." Abigail blinked back tears. "I'm not going anywhere." Eli returned with the tea and watched as Abigail carefully lifted June, supporting the child's head while coaxing her to take small sips. The tea was bitter, willow bark always was, but June drank it without complaint, her trust in Abigail absolute. "Good girl," Abigail murmured. "You're so brave." Once June had drunk enough, Abigail laid her back down and began the work of cooling her fever. Wet cloths on her forehead, her wrists, behind her knees. Ancient techniques passed down from healer to healer, mother to daughter, generation to generation. The same techniques her mother had used on her when she was small and sick, the same words whispered in the same gentle cadence. Eli watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. But his eyes held something that looked like wonder, or maybe disbelief, as if he couldn't quite process that this stranger, this woman he'd found alone on a train platform, was now in his home, caring for his daughter with the kind of practiced skill that spoke of deep knowledge. "Where did you learn this?" he asked quietly. "My mother." Abigail didn't look up, focused on her work. "She was a healer in her band, taught me everything she knew before she died." "How old were you?" 13. The memory was old but still sharp. "Fever took her too, probably the same one that killed half the band that winter." She paused, then added softly, "I tried everything I knew. It wasn't enough." "You were a child." "I was a healer, or trying to be." Abigail changed the cloth on June's forehead, checking the child's pulse. Steady. Good. "It's hard, learning that sometimes knowledge isn't enough. Sometimes people die despite everything you do." "Yeah." Eli's voice was rough. "Yeah, it is." They fell silent, working together. Abigail tending to June, Eli bringing fresh water, more cloths, more tea. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, but inside the cabin was warm, filled with firelight and the sharp scent of medicinal herbs. June's fever began to break around midnight, her skin cooling, her breathing evening out. She slipped from restless sleep into true rest, her small hand still wrapped around Abigail's fingers. "She's going to be all right," Abigail said finally, exhaustion washing over her now that the crisis had passed. "The fever broke. She just needs rest now." Eli's shoulders sagged with relief. He scrubbed a hand over his face, and Abigail saw how tired he looked, lines of worry etched deep, shadows under his eyes. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. I don't know what I would have done if you would have managed." Abigail carefully extracted her hand from June's grip and stood, her knees protesting. "You're her father. You would have found a way." "Maybe." He looked at his sleeping daughter, then at Abigail. "But I'm damn glad I didn't have to try alone." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Abigail became suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation, alone with this man, in his home, in the middle of the night. She should feel uncomfortable, should feel unsafe, but she didn't. "You should rest," Eli said, seeming to sense her discomfort. "The spare room is through there. It's not much, but the bed's clean and there's extra blankets. I'll stay with June tonight in case the fever comes back." "I can stay." "You've done enough." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "You've been traveling for days. You've had the worst day imaginable, and you just spent hours healing my daughter. Rest, Abigail, please." The use of her name, the first time he'd said it, made something flutter in her chest. She nodded, too tired to argue. "If her fever spikes again, I'll get you immediately. The tea should be given every 4 hours, just a few sips, and keep the cool cloths going if she gets hot again." "I will." Abigail gathered her carpet bag and moved toward the spare room, but paused at the doorway. "Eli?" He looked up. "Yeah?" "Thank you for not leaving me on that platform." His expression softened. "Thank you for finding my daughter, for helping her." A pause. "For not judging us." "Judging you." "This house, the Comanche touches, the herbs labeled in 2 languages." He met her eyes squarely. "Most people in Timber Ridge made their opinions clear about my marriage, about my wife, about raising a child in a house that honored both her parents' heritages." Abigail understood then, really understood, why he'd helped her. Not out of pity, not out of charity, but out of recognition. He'd seen in her the same thing she'd seen in this house, proof of 2 worlds colliding, proof of love that crossed boundaries others wanted to keep rigid and fixed. "I would never judge that," she said quietly. "It's beautiful." His throat worked. He nodded once, and Abigail slipped into the spare room, closing the door softly behind her. The room was small and simple, a bed with a thick quilt, a dresser, a window with flour sack curtains. But it was warm and clean and private, and it was more than she'd had any right to expect when she'd stood alone on that platform hours ago. Abigail set down her bag and sank onto the bed, her body finally acknowledging its exhaustion. She should change into her nightdress, should wash her face, should do all the normal things. But instead she just sat there, staring at her hands, hands that had tended a sick child, hands that had been held by that child, hands that had been useful for the first time in so long. "Can you be my mommy?" June's question echoed in her mind. The child hadn't asked if Abigail wanted to be a mother. She'd asked if Abigail could be, as if it were a matter of capability, not desire. As if being a mother were something you did rather than something you were. And maybe it was. Maybe all those years of dreaming about children, about family, about belonging, maybe she'd been thinking about it wrong. Maybe you didn't become a mother because a man chose you, because society deemed you acceptable, because you fit into some narrow definition of worthy. Maybe you became a mother by choosing it, by doing the work, by showing up. Outside, she could hear Eli moving around. His footsteps crossing the main room, the sound of water being poured, the creak of the chair beside June's bed. Father sounds, protective sounds, the sounds of a man who loved his daughter more than anything else in the world. Abigail thought of Samuel Garrett, who'd fled rather than face her, thought of Thomas and William and Christopher, who'd looked at her and seen only what she wasn't, not white enough, not pure enough, not acceptable enough. Thought of all the times she'd been told, explicitly or implicitly, that she was a mistake, that her existence was a problem, that her mixed blood made her less than, other than, unwanted. And then she thought of Eli, who'd married a Comanche woman and loved her anyway, who honored her memory in every corner of this house, who was raising their daughter to know both her heritages, who'd looked at Abigail standing alone on a train platform and seen someone worth helping. Maybe, just maybe, there were different kinds of people in the world than she'd thought. Maybe not everyone would reject her. Maybe not every door was closed. She lay back on the bed, pulling the quilt over her body. It smelled like cedar and sunshine, like it had been hung outside to air. Clean, good smells. Home smells. Through the door, she'd heard June murmur something, and Eli's low voice responding. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was gentle, soothing. Father comforting daughter, family sounds. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, Abigail Cross felt something that might have been hope. It was small and fragile, barely more than a flicker. But it was there. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, the last thing she heard being June's sleepy voice drifting through the wall. "Papa, is Miss Abby still here?" "She's here, baby girl." "Good. I like her." "Me too, June. Me too." And in the spare room, listening to this exchange between father and daughter, Abigail smiled into the darkness and allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine that maybe, somehow, she'd finally found somewhere she belonged. Morning came slowly to the Montana hollow, dawn filtering through the pines in shades of pearl and gold. Abigail woke to unfamiliar sounds, the crackle of a fire being stoked, the low murmur of voices, the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, she lay disoriented, her mind struggling to place where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The empty platform, the lost child. Eli Harper's unexpected kindness, June's fever breaking in the deep hours of night. She sat up carefully, her body stiff from exhaustion and the strange bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Eli talking softly, and June's voice responding, stronger now, no longer fever-weak. Relief flooded through her. The child was better. Abigail rose and dressed quickly, smoothing her worn traveling dress as best she could. Her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser showed a woman with shadows under her eyes, dark hair escaping its braid, but alive. Still here, still breathing. When she emerged from the spare room, the scene that greeted her made her pause in the doorway. June was sitting at the table wrapped in a quilt, her golden curls wild around her face, holding a mug of what looked like warm milk. Eli stood at the stove, his back to Abigail, turning something in a skillet. The morning light through the window caught the edges of everything, the steam rising from the coffee pot, the dust motes dancing in the air, the way June's small hands wrapped around her cup. It looked like family. It looked like home. "Miss Abby!" June's face lit up when she spotted Abigail. "You're awake. Papa said to let you sleep, but I wanted to wake you up and say thank you for making me feel better." Eli turned from the stove, and his eyes met Abigail's. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly, the strong line of his jaw, the weariness that seemed permanently etched into his features, but also something else, something that might have been relief or gratitude or simply acknowledgement that she'd kept her word and stayed. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "Coffee?" "Please." Abigail moved to the table, her hand automatically reaching to touch June's forehead. Still warm, but nothing like the burning heat of last night. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "My head doesn't hurt anymore," June announced proudly. "And Papa made eggs. Do you want eggs? He makes them with butter, and they're really good." "June, let Miss Cross wake up before you talk her ear off." But Eli was smiling slightly as he said it, pouring coffee into a chipped ceramic mug and bringing it to Abigail. Their fingers brushed as she took the cup, and she felt the calluses on his hands, working hands, honest hands. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the coffee, for everything. You saved my daughter's life." He said it plainly, like it was a simple fact. "Least I can do is offer you breakfast." I didn't save her life. It was just a fever. It was just a fever that killed my wife." The words came out harder than he probably intended, and June's eyes widened. Eli caught himself, softening his tone. "What I mean is, I couldn't help June last night. Didn't know what to do. You did. That matters." Abigail didn't know how to respond to that, so she sipped her coffee instead. It was strong and bitter and exactly what she needed. Outside, she could hear birds beginning their morning songs, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of cattle lowing. Eli returned to the stove, sliding eggs onto 3 plates. He brought them to the table. Simple fare, eggs and bread, but it smelled like heaven. Abigail couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for her. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, June swinging her legs under the table, Eli methodically working through his food. Abigail watched them covertly. The way Eli cut June's eggs into smaller pieces without being asked. The way June reached over to pat her father's hand when he seemed to drift into dark thoughts. The unspoken language of 2 people who'd learned to be a family of 2 after being a family of 3. "Papa," June said suddenly, "can Miss Abby stay forever?" Eli's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "June, we talked about this. Miss Cross has her own life to get back to." "But she doesn't." June looked at Abigail with those clear, honest eyes that children have, the ones that see straight through adult pretenses. That's why she was on the platform all alone. That's why she was sad. The man who was supposed to marry her didn't come, so she doesn't have anywhere to go. June Harper. Eli's voice held a warning note. "It's all right," Abigail said quietly, setting down her fork. "She's not wrong." She met Eli's gaze squarely. "I appreciate your hospitality, truly, but I know I can't stay. I'll head back to town today, figure out my next steps. Perhaps there's work somewhere, or doing what?" Eli's question wasn't cruel, just practical. "You said yourself you have 73 cents. That won't last a day in Timber Ridge, and work—" He trailed off, but Abigail could fill in the rest. Work for a woman like her in a town like that would be scarce or worse. "I'll manage," she said, lifting her chin. "I always do." "Or," June piped up, her voice taking on the particular tone of a child who thinks she's being very clever, "you could stay here and help Papa. He needs help. He's always saying how much work there is and how he wishes he had more hands and—" "June, that's enough." Eli's voice was firm now. "Miss Cross is our guest, not an employee, and she certainly doesn't want to be trapped on a ranch in the middle of nowhere with 2 strangers." But something in his words caught Abigail's attention. "You do need help?" Eli's jaw tightened. "I can manage. That's not what I asked." He was silent for a moment, clearly debating whether to answer honestly. Finally, he sighed. "The ranch is struggling. I lost most of my hands after Weena died. The ones who stayed left when I couldn't pay them. It's just me now, trying to keep everything running while taking care of June." He glanced at his daughter. "It's manageable. Barely." Abigail studied him, seeing the truth beneath his words. The exhaustion, the barely contained worry, the weight of trying to be everything, father, rancher, provider, all alone. She recognized it because she'd carried similar weight herself, the burden of trying to survive in a world that didn't want to make space for you. "I could help," she heard herself say. "I'm strong. I can cook, clean, mend, garden. I know herbs and healing. I can read and do figures." She paused. "And I have nowhere else to go." Eli stared at her. "You're offering to work for room and board?" "I'm offering to work for a place to stay while I figure out what comes next." She kept her voice steady, practical. "You need help. I need shelter. It's a fair trade. Miss Cross," Abigail, "if we're going to be practical about this, you might as well use my given name." "Abigail, then." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. "You don't know anything about me, about this place, about what you'd be agreeing to. I know you helped me when you didn't have to. I know you loved your wife enough to honor her memory. I know you're raising your daughter to know both sides of her heritage, which means you're braver than most men I've met." She met his eyes. "And I know that right now, I'm more useful to you here than I would be anywhere else." June was watching this exchange with barely contained excitement, her eyes darting between her father and Abigail like she was watching a horse race. "Please, Papa, please can she stay? I like her. She's nice, and she smells good like the herbs Mama used to use, and she told me stories last night when I was sick." "I didn't tell you stories," Abigail said gently. "You were mostly asleep." "But you were talking," June insisted, "in that other language, the one that sounds like singing. It made me feel safe." Abigail's throat tightened. She'd been speaking Kiowa, the prayers her mother had taught her, the healing words that were meant to comfort and protect. She hadn't even realized she'd been doing it. Eli was looking at her with something unreadable in his eyes. "You speak Kiowa?" "It was my mother's language, my first language." She waited for the judgment, the suggestion that English should be enough, that native tongues had no place in civilized society. But Eli just nodded slowly. "Weena used to sing to June in Comanche. After she died, I tried to remember the songs, but—" He glanced at his daughter. "I couldn't carry the tune, couldn't remember all the words. June hasn't heard her mother's language in 8 months." The weight of that statement settled over the table. A child losing her mother was tragedy enough, but losing the language too, the songs, the prayers, that was a different kind of death. A cultural erasure that happened one generation at a time. "I could teach her," Abigail said softly. "Not Comanche. I don't know it. But Kiowa. Some of the words are similar. The structure is close. It would be something." Eli's expression cracked, just slightly, just enough for Abigail to see the grief beneath the careful control. "You'd do that?" "If you'd let me stay, yes." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Abigail could see Eli weighing the decision, the practicality of having help against the danger of letting a stranger into his life, into his daughter's life, into the home he'd built with a woman he clearly still loved. Finally, June broke the silence. "Papa, remember what Mama used to say? About how the Creator sends help in unexpected shapes?" Eli's eyes closed briefly, and Abigail saw pain flicker across his face. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Abigail. "1 month," he said. "Trial period. You work, I provide room and board. At the end of the month, we both decide if the arrangement should continue. Fair?" It was more than fair. It was a lifeline. "Fair," Abigail agreed, extending her hand across the table. Eli took it, his grip firm and warm. They shook once, sealing the bargain, and June let out a whoop of joy that made them both smile despite the seriousness of what they'd just agreed to. "I'll show you around after breakfast," Eli said, releasing her hand and returning to his eggs. "Ranch isn't much, some cattle, a few horses, chickens, a vegetable garden that's mostly dead at this point. The work is hard and the hours are long." "I'm not afraid of hard work." "Didn't figure you were." Glanced at her. "But I need to be clear about something. The reason I lost most of my ranch hands wasn't just about money. It was about Weena, about me marrying a Comanche woman, about people in town making their opinions known about what that meant." "I understand," Abigail said quietly. "I've been dealing with people's opinions my whole life. Some of those opinions come with actions." Eli's voice went hard. "There were incidents, threats. Once someone tried to burn down the barn. Another time someone shot at Wana when she was riding into town." His jaw clenched. "I made it clear that anyone who touched my family would answer to me, but that doesn't mean everyone's happy about us being here. And if you stay, if you're associated with this household, people will talk. Worse than talk, maybe." Abigail considered this. She'd faced hatred before, the kind that came with slurs and closed doors and sudden violence. But she'd always faced it alone, with no one standing beside her. The idea of being part of something, even if that something was a target, felt strangely less frightening than continuing to wander alone. "I still want to stay," she said simply. Eli studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then. Welcome to Harper Ranch, Abigail Cross." June bounced in her seat, clapping her hands. "Can I show her my room, Papa? And the chickens? And the place by the creek where the columbines grow in summer?" "After we finish breakfast and you rest some more," Eli said. "You were sick last night. You need to take it easy today." "But I feel fine now." "That's because because Abigail healed you. But fever can come back if you push too hard." He gave his daughter a look that brooked no argument. "Rest this morning. This afternoon, if you still feel good, you can show Abigail around." June pouted but didn't argue further. She'd learned, apparently, to pick her battles with her father. They finished breakfast in companionable silence, and Abigail helped clear the dishes despite Eli's protests. As she worked, washing plates in the basin, drying them with a clean cloth, she found herself studying the cabin more carefully in the daylight. It was clearly a home that had been cared for, The floor was swept clean, the furniture simple but well made, everything in its place. But there were signs of struggle too. A broken chair leg propped in the corner, waiting to be fixed. A window with a crack sealed with cloth. Shelves that looked half empty, like things had been sold off one by one. And everywhere, signs of Weena. The beaded dress by the hearth, the turquoise charm on the mantel, a pair of moccasins, small and delicate, sitting by the door. Eli hadn't erased her, hadn't tried to move on by removing her presence. Instead, he'd preserved it, kept it alive for June to see and remember. She was beautiful. Abigail turned to find Eli standing beside her, holding a small framed photograph. In it, a young woman with dark hair and dark eyes sat straight-backed and serious, wearing a simple dress and holding an infant. Her Comanche heritage was clear in her features, and there was something fierce in her gaze, a woman who knew her own worth and wouldn't apologize for it. "She looks strong," Abigail said softly. She was. Eli's thumb traced the edge of the frame. "Strongest person I ever knew." When we met, she was working as a translator at Fort Ellis. Her family had been moved to a reservation in Oklahoma, but she'd run away, made her way north, found work using her languages. English, Comanche, Kiowa, some Spanish. He smiled slightly. "First time I saw her, she was telling off a cavalry officer in 3 languages. I was half in love before she even noticed me." "How did you convince her to marry you?" "Persistence, and the fact that I actually listened when she talked." He set the photograph back on the mantel with careful reverence. "Took 2 years. 2 years of me coming by the fort every time I had business there. 2 years of conversations. 2 years of me proving I wasn't like the other white men she'd dealt with." And then what? Abigail found herself genuinely curious, wanting to know how this man and this woman had built something real in a world determined to keep them apart. "Then she got pregnant, and I asked her to marry me, and she said yes." Eli's expression softened. "We had 3 good years. 3 years where this cabin felt like the center of the universe, where everything made sense." His voice roughened. "And then the fever came, and she was gone in 3 days, and nothing's made sense since." Abigail didn't offer platitudes. She'd lost too much herself to believe in the comfort of empty words. Instead, she just said, "I'm sorry." "Yeah." Eli cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotion. "Anyway, you should know what you're walking into. This isn't just a ranch. It's a monument to a woman people in town wanted to pretend didn't exist." "Good," Abigail said firmly. "The world could use more monuments to women like that." Something shifted in Eli's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. He looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time, seeing past the surface to whatever was underneath. "You would have liked her," he said finally, "and I think she would have liked you." Before Abigail could respond, June called from the bedroom, "Papa, my stomach hurts." Eli moved immediately, his body tensing with alarm. Abigail followed, finding June sitting on the bed, her face pale, one hand pressed to her middle. "Where does it hurt, baby girl?" Eli knelt beside the bed, his hand on her forehead checking for fever. "Here." June pressed her hand to her lower abdomen. "It feels funny, like it's rolling around." Abigail stepped closer, her healer's mind running through possibilities. "June, when was the last time you had a proper meal?" June thought about it. "Yesterday morning, Papa made oatmeal, but I only ate a little because my throat hurt." "So you've gone almost a full day without eating, then had eggs and milk on an empty stomach." Abigail glanced at Eli. "I think she's just hungry. Her body's not used to food after the fever." The relief on Eli's face was palpable. "You're sure?" "Fairly sure. But we should take it slow. June, do you feel like you might be sick?" June shook her head. "Just weird." "All right. Lie down for a bit, let your stomach settle. In an hour, we'll try some broth, something light. And then if that stays down, we'll work up to regular food." Abigail smiled at the child. "Your body went through a lot last night. It needs time to recover." "Will you stay with me?" June asked, her small hand reaching for Abigail's. "Tell me more stories in the singing language?" Abigail glanced at Eli, who nodded. "I need to check on the livestock anyway. Make sure everything survived the night without me." "Go," Abigail said. "I'll stay with her." Eli lingered for a moment, like he wasn't quite sure about leaving his daughter with this woman he'd just met. But finally, he squeezed June's foot affectionately and headed for the door. "I'll be back in an hour. Shout if you need anything." Once he was gone, Abigail settled into the chair beside June's bed. The child was watching her with bright, curious eyes, the kind of gaze that suggested a very active mind behind it. "What do the stories mean?" June asked. "The ones you told last night. I could hear them, but I couldn't understand them." "They're healing prayers," Abigail explained. "Stories about how the world came to be, about spirits that protect us, about the connections between all living things. My mother taught them to me when I was your age." "Is your mother in heaven with my mama?" The question was so innocent, so direct, that it took Abigail's breath away. "Yes," she said softly. "I think she is." "Do you think they know each other? Do you think they're friends?" Abigail felt her eyes sting. "I like to think so." June was quiet for a moment, her small fingers tracing patterns on the quilt. Then, "Miss Abby, why was your mama different from other mamas?" "What do you know about different?" Abigail asked carefully. "I know my mama was Comanche and that some people didn't like that. I know they said mean things. Papa tried to keep me from hearing, but I heard anyway." June's voice was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. "I know people think I'm different too. That's why I don't have friends in town." Abigail's heart broke a little. This child, barely 5 years old, already learning the lessons that Abigail had spent her whole life learning, already understanding that the world divided people into acceptable and unacceptable, wanted and unwanted. "My mama was Kiowa," Abigail said gently, "and my father was Scottish. That made me different from both my mama's people and my father's people. I spent my whole life not quite fitting anywhere." "Did it make you sad?" "Sometimes. Very sad." Abigail took June's small hand in hers, "But it also made me strong, made me understand things other people don't understand, made me able to see beauty in places other people miss." June considered this seriously. "I don't feel strong. I just feel lonely sometimes." "I know, sweetheart, but you're not alone. You have your papa, who loves you more than anything. And now you have me, at least for a little while." "For longer than a little while," June said with the confidence of a child who'd already decided how things would go. "You're going to stay forever. I know you are. How do you know that?" June smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she knew secrets adults had forgotten. "Because you need us. And we need you. That's how families work." The simple wisdom of it struck Abigail silent. This child, who'd lost her mother and spent months watching her father struggle alone, who'd been isolated from other children because of who she was, this child understood family in a way that Abigail, with all her years and all her pain, was only beginning to grasp. "Tell me a story," June said, settling deeper into her pillows. "A story about your mama. I want to know about her." So Abigail did. She told June about her mother, about Laughing Bird, who'd been named for the way her voice sounded when she was happy, about how she could identify hundreds of plants by sight and smell, about how she'd tended to anyone in the band who was sick or hurt, about how she'd loved a Scottish trapper despite knowing he would leave, because love, she'd said, was always worth the risk. She told June about learning to gather herbs with her mother, about the songs they'd sing while they worked, about the way her mother's hands had moved, quick and sure and gentle, when she prepared medicines. She told her about the winter her mother got sick, about trying desperately to save her with everything she'd been taught, about holding her hand at the end and hearing her final words. "You carry both worlds in you, little bird. That's not a curse. That's a gift. Don't let them convince you otherwise." By the time she finished, June's eyes were heavy-lidded, her breathing evening out. "Your mama sounds like my mama," she murmured. "Strong and brave and beautiful." "I think they would have been good friends," Abigail agreed softly. "Miss Abby?" June's voice was barely a whisper now. "Will you teach me about plants like your mama taught you?" "Yes, sweetheart. I'll teach you everything I know." "Promise?" "I promise." June smiled and let her eyes close, her small hand still wrapped around Abigail's. Within minutes, she was asleep. her breathing deep and steady. Abigail sat there, watching this child sleep, and felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't love. Not yet. Too soon for that. But it was something. Recognition, maybe. Or possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, this place could become something more than just a temporary stop on her endless journey of displacement. She heard the cabin door open and close quietly. Eli appeared in the doorway, his eyes immediately going to June's sleeping form, checking, assessing, making sure his daughter was all right. When he saw she was resting peacefully, some of the tension left his shoulders. "She's fine," Abigail said quietly. "Just tired. The fever took a lot out of her." Eli nodded, moving into the room. He stood at the foot of the bed, looking down at his daughter with an expression of such fierce love and protectiveness that Abigail had to look away. It was too intimate, too raw. "Thank you," he said after a moment, "for staying with her, for everything. You don't need to keep thanking me." "Yes, I do." He met her eyes. "You didn't have to help. You could have stayed in that waiting room last night, could have figured out your own way. But you found June, you helped her, and now you're here. That deserves thanks." Abigail stood carefully, not wanting to wake June. "She asked me to teach her about plants, about healing, the way my mother taught me." Something flickered across Eli's face. "Weena tried to teach her, but June was too young, barely old enough to pay attention. And after," he trailed off. "I don't know enough to teach her myself." "I could," Abigail offered, "if you'd want that, if you're comfortable with it." "Comfortable with my daughter learning the old ways, learning something her mother would have wanted her to know?" Eli's voice was rough. "Yeah, Abigail, I'm comfortable with that." They stood there in the small bedroom, June sleeping between them, and Abigail felt the weight of what was happening. She was being woven into something, into this family's fabric, into their daily rhythms, into their grief and their hope. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely unexpected. "I should let you show me around," she said finally, breaking the spell. "So I know what I've gotten myself into." Eli smiled slightly. "Fair enough. Let me show you what passes for Harper Ranch these days." They left June sleeping and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The hollow where the cabin sat was more beautiful in daylight than Abigail had realized, surrounded by tall pines, with a creek running nearby, the sound of water over rocks a constant soft music. The barn was well built but clearly in need of repairs, the corral posts leaning slightly, the chicken coop patched with mismatched wood. "Weena and I built most of this ourselves," Eli said as they walked. "Took 3 years of hard work. We had plans for more, a bigger house, more livestock, maybe hire some permanent hands. But then," he gestured at the rundown state of things, "you can see how that went." Abigail looked around, seeing not just what was, but what could be. The bones were good, the land was good. It just needed work, a lot of work. "Where do you need the most help?" she asked practically. "Everywhere," Eli said with dark humor. "But if I had to prioritize, the garden needs to be cleared and prepared for spring planting. The chickens need better housing before winter comes back. The barn needs repairs, the cattle need better fencing, and June needs—" He stopped. "June needs someone who can be there when I can't. Someone who knows healing, who can teach her things I can't, who can help her remember her mother without breaking down." His voice cracked slightly on the last words. Abigail understood then the real reason he'd agreed to let her stay. It wasn't just about the work, though that mattered. It was about June, about giving his daughter something he couldn't give her alone. Connection to the heritage she'd lost when her mother died, knowledge that would otherwise be forgotten, the presence of a woman who understood what it meant to walk between worlds. "I can do that," she said quietly. "All of it. I can help." Eli looked at her, and in his eyes she saw hope warring with fear. Hope that maybe things could get better, fear that letting someone in would only lead to more loss. She understood. She felt the same way. 1 month, he said again, like he needed to remind them both. Trial period. 1 month, she agreed. But as they walked the property together, Eli pointing out the boundaries of the ranch and the work that needed doing, Abigail couldn't shake June's words. "You're going to stay forever. I know you are." And maybe, just maybe, the child was wiser than either of the adults wanted to admit. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Abigail with its naturalness. She woke before dawn to start the fire and make coffee, moving quietly so as not to wake June. Eli would emerge from his room as the first light touched the pines, his hair damp from washing, his movement still heavy with sleep but purposeful. They'd share coffee in companionable silence before he headed out to tend the livestock, and she started breakfast. June recovered quickly, her resilience the way of children who haven't yet learned to hold on to illness. Within 2 days, she was back to her energetic self, following Abigail around the cabin, asking endless questions. What was that herb for? Why did you cut the vegetables that way? Could she help? Could she learn? Could Abigail teach her the songs her mother used to sing? And Abigail, who'd spent so many years alone, found herself saying yes. Yes to all of it. Yes to this child who'd decided Abigail was hers now, who'd claimed her with the absolute certainty only children possess. The work was harder than Abigail had anticipated. Eli hadn't been exaggerating about the state of the ranch. The garden was a tangle of dead plants and weeds that needed to be cleared before winter set in completely. The chicken coop had a hole in one wall that let in cold air and predators. The barn roof leaked in 3 places, the fences sagged. Everything needed attention, and there was only so much 2 people could accomplish in a day. But they tried. God, they tried. Abigail worked until her hands blistered and her back ached, clearing the garden plot, mending clothes, scrubbing floors, preparing meals from their dwindling stores. Eli worked from first light to last, fixing what could be fixed, making do with what couldn't, his face growing more haggard as the days passed and the work never seemed to diminish. At night, they'd gather around the table for supper, simple meals of beans and cornbread, or stew stretched thin with vegetables, or occasionally a chicken that had stopped laying. June would chatter about her day, about the things Abigail had taught her, about the stories she remembered of her mother. And Eli would listen with an expression that was equal parts joy and pain, grateful his daughter was thriving, but grieving that Weena wasn't there to see it. 2 weeks into Abigail's stay, the first real test came. It was a Saturday, and Eli announced at breakfast that he needed to go into Timber Ridge to sell 3 steers and buy supplies. Winter's coming, he said, not meeting Abigail's eyes. Need to stock up while we still can. Can I come? June asked immediately. Please, Papa, I want to see the town. I want to show Miss Abby the mercantile and— No. Eli's voice was firm. You stay here with Abigail. But Papa— I said no, June. There was something in his tone that made the child fall silent, something that spoke of old fears and painful memories. After breakfast, as Eli prepared the wagon, Abigail found him in the barn. Is there a reason June can't go to town? She asked quietly. Eli's hand stilled on the harness he was checking. There are a lot of reasons, he said finally. Most of them involving people who said ugly things about her mother, who made it clear June wasn't welcome in their stores, their churches, their schools. His jaw clenched. I won't subject her to that unless I have to. And you? Abigail pressed. They say ugly things to you too, don't they? I can handle it. I'm an adult. She's a child. He turned to face her. The last time I brought her to town, a woman spit at her feet and called her a half-breed bastard. June was 4 years old. She cried all the way home. The memory made his voice go rough. So no, she doesn't come to town. Not until she's old enough to understand that other people's hate says nothing about her worth. Abigail felt rage kindle in her chest, rage she recognized, rage she'd carried her whole life. I know those people, she said quietly. I've met them in every town I've ever been. They'll never think she's old enough, Eli. They'll never think she has worth no matter what you do. I know. The defeat in his voice was heartbreaking. But I can at least keep her away from the worst of it while she's young. Let her have a few more years of innocence before the world teaches her what it thinks of her. Abigail understood. Of course she did. But she also knew what it cost, this protection through isolation. She'd lived it herself, taught to avoid, to hide, to make herself small so others wouldn't notice her enough to hate her. It was survival, but it was also a kind of death. Be careful, she said finally. In town, I always am. He paused, then added awkwardly, There's a rifle above the door, loaded. If anyone comes around while I'm gone, I know how to shoot. He looked surprised, then nodded. Right. Of course you do. He finished with the harness and led the horses out. I'll be back before dark. If I'm not, you will be, Abigail said firmly, refusing to entertain the alternative. Eli climbed onto the wagon, then hesitated. Abigail? Thank you for staying, for helping. He trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. For not making me explain why things are the way they are. I don't need explanations for things I've lived myself, she said simply. Something passed between them then, an understanding, an acknowledgement of shared experience. Then Eli clicked to the horses and the wagon rolled away, leaving Abigail standing in the yard watching until it disappeared into the trees. June appeared at her elbow, her small hand slipping into Abigail's. Papa doesn't like going to town, she said matter-of-factly. He always comes back sad and angry. I know, sweetheart. Is it because of me? Because I'm different? Abigail knelt down, looking June in the eyes. It's because some people are small and mean and afraid of anything that's not exactly like them. That's not your fault. That's their failing, not yours. June considered this seriously. Miss Abby, do you think I'm beautiful? The question, asked with such vulnerable hope, made Abigail's heart clench. I think you're one of the most beautiful children I've ever seen. You have your mother's eyes and your father's courage and a spirit that shines so bright it could light up the whole territory. June's face broke into a brilliant smile. Really? Really and truly. Abigail stood, still holding the child's hand. Now, I think today is a good day for me to teach you about winter herbs. What do you say? Yes! June bounced with excitement. Can we go to the place by the creek where Mama used to take me? We can go wherever you want. They spent the morning exploring the land around the cabin, Abigail teaching and June absorbing everything like a sponge. The child had a natural aptitude for it, could remember which plants were which after being shown only once, understood instinctively which parts of the plant to harvest and which to leave alone, moved through the woods with a quiet grace that spoke of her mother's teachings. Mama used to say plants were our relatives, June said, as they knelt beside a patch of yarrow. She said we had to treat them with respect, say thank you when we took from them. Your mama was right, Abigail said, showing June how to harvest the leaves without damaging the roots. My mother taught me the same thing. Everything is connected, people, plants, animals, the earth itself. When we forget that, when we start thinking we're separate from everything else, that's when we lose our way. June was quiet for a moment, her small fingers carefully plucking leaves. Then, is that why some people are mean? Because they forgot they're connected to everything? The wisdom of the question stopped Abigail cold. Yes, she said softly. I think that's exactly why. They gathered herbs until their baskets were full, then returned to the cabin to begin the work of drying and storing them. Abigail taught June how to bundle plants for hanging, how to separate seeds, how to store roots in the cool darkness of the root cellar. The child's hands were small but careful, her concentration absolute. You're a natural healer, Abigail told her as they worked. Your mother would be so proud. June looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Do you really think so? I know so. Abigail pulled the child into a hug, feeling June's small arms wrap around her waist. She's watching over you, sweetheart. She sees how hard you're trying, how much you're learning. She sees everything. Beauty, but no less precious. But we honor them by remembering what they taught us, by keeping their knowledge alive. That's how they stay with us. They stayed like that for a long moment. Two people who'd lost their mothers holding on to each other, finding comfort in shared grief. Then June pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Can we make the tea Mama used to make? The one that smells like flowers? The elderflower tea? Yes, that one. Papa loved it, but he can't remember how to make it right. So they made tea together, June carefully measuring while Abigail guided her hands. They steeped it properly, strained it into cups, added honey the way Weena had apparently preferred. And when it was ready, they sat at the table and drank it together, June's face glowing with accomplishment. This tastes like Mama, she said softly. Like she's here with us. She is, Abigail assured her. In every plant we harvested, in every lesson we learned, in every moment we spend remembering her. She's here. The afternoon passed peacefully. They worked in the cabin, Abigail mending while June practiced her letters, something Wina had apparently started teaching her before she died. The child was bright, picking up reading quickly, hungry for knowledge in a way that reminded Abigail of herself at that age. "Will you teach me to read better?" June asked. "Papa tries, but he's always so tired and he doesn't know all the words." "Of course I'll teach you." Abigail had brought a few books with her, battered volumes she'd collected over the years, classics and poetry, and one precious medical text. "We'll read together every day if you'd like." "I'd like that very much." They were deep in a story, Abigail reading aloud while June followed along, when they heard it. The sound of horses approaching, multiple horses, moving fast. Abigail's stomach dropped. She stood quickly, moving to the window. 3 riders were coming up the path, and even from a distance she could see they weren't friendly visitors. Their postures were aggressive, their pace deliberately intimidating. "June," Abigail said, keeping her voice calm despite the fear racing through her, "I want you to go to your room and stay there. Don't come out until I tell you to." "But now, June, please." Something in Abigail's tone must have conveyed the seriousness, because June didn't argue. She ran to her room, and Abigail heard the door close. Then she moved to the fireplace, reaching up to take down the rifle Eli had mentioned. It was heavy in her hands, but familiar. Her father might have been worthless in most ways, but he taught her to shoot before he disappeared. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, their horses snorting and stamping. Abigail stepped out onto the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. The 3 men were rough-looking, probably ranch hands from one of the bigger spreads. Their faces showed a mixture of curiosity and contempt. "Well, well," the leader said, a tall man with a scarred face and mean eyes. "Eli's got himself a new squaw already. That was fast." Abigail forced herself to remain calm, to not react to the slur. "Mr. Harper isn't here. You'll need to come back another time." "We're not here to see Eli," Scarface said, dismounting. The other 2 followed suit. "We're here to deliver a message. This land, this ranch, it's not wanted here. The folks in Timber Ridge have been patient, but patience has limits." "This is Mr. Harper's land," Abigail said steadily. "He has a deed. He's broken no laws." "Maybe not white man's laws," another rider said, this one younger with cold eyes. "But there are other kinds of laws, like the law that says a man shouldn't pollute good Montana land by bringing savages onto it." "Get off this property," Abigail said, her voice hardening. "Now!" Scarface laughed. "Or what? You gonna shoot us? 3 against 1 and you're just a woman?" He took a step closer. "Here's how this is going to go. You're going to tell Eli Harper that he's got 2 choices. He can sell this land and move on, go somewhere that tolerates his kind. Or he can stay, and things are going to get a lot more unpleasant." "He's not selling." Abigail raised the rifle, pointing it directly at Scarface's chest. "And if you take one more step toward this house, I will shoot you. That's not a threat. That's a promise." The men exchanged glances, recalculating. Clearly, they hadn't expected resistance. Most women would have been terrified, would have cowered, but Abigail had spent too many years being threatened, being pushed, being told she had no right to space or safety or dignity. She was done cowering. "You're making a mistake," Scarface said, but he didn't move forward. "Eli Harper is finished in this territory. Everyone knows it. He's drowning in debt, barely keeping this place running. All we're offering is a way out before things get worse." "I said get off this property." Abigail's finger moved to the trigger. "I won't ask again." For a long moment, nobody moved. The standoff hung in the air, tense and dangerous. Then, from somewhere in the distance, they heard it, the sound of a wagon approaching, moving fast. Eli. The riders heard it too. Scarface spat into the dirt. "We'll be back," he said, "and next time Eli Harper better be ready to listen to reason." He remounted, the others following suit. "You tell him that. You tell him his time is running out." They rode off just as Eli's wagon came into view, the 2 groups passing each other on the path. Abigail saw Eli's face go dark with recognition and fury. He urged the horses faster, pulling up in front of the cabin in a spray of gravel. "What did they want?" he demanded, jumping down from the wagon. "Did they hurt you? Where's June?" "June's safe. In her room." They didn't hurt me. Abigail lowered the rifle, her hands trembling now that the danger had passed. They came to deliver a message. They want you to sell the ranch and leave. Eli's jaw clenched so hard Abigail could see the muscles jumping. Those sons of... He caught himself, glancing at the cabin where June might be listening. Did they threaten you? They tried. I convinced them otherwise. She managed a shaky smile. Turns out pointing a rifle at someone is very persuasive. Christ, Abigail. Eli ran a hand through his hair. You could have been killed. If they'd called your bluff, it wasn't a bluff. She met his eyes. I would have shot them if they'd tried to enter this house. I've had enough of men thinking they can push women around just because they're bigger and meaner. Something shifted in Eli's expression. Surprise, respect, and something else Abigail couldn't quite name. You're full of surprises, aren't you? I've had to be. She handed him the rifle. They said you're drowning in debt, that you're barely keeping this place running. Is that true? Eli's face closed off. That's my problem, not yours. I'm living here, working here. That makes it my problem too. Abigail crossed her arms. Are we in danger, Eli? Real danger? He was silent for a long moment, clearly debating how much to tell her. Finally, he sighed. Yes, real danger. Those men work for Marcus Thornton, owns the biggest spread in the territory. He's been trying to buy this land for years. Made Wina and me a generous offer when we first built the cabin. His voice went hard. We refused. This land is ours, bought legal and fair. We weren't going to let him bully us off it. And now? Now he's waiting for me to fail, waiting for the debt to crush me so he can buy the land for pennies when the bank forecloses. Eli looked at the cabin, at the land he and Wina had carved out of wilderness. I owe 3 months' mortgage. Got until the end of December to pay it, or the bank takes everything. Abigail did quick calculations in her head. How much? $240. He said it flatly. Might as well be $2,000 for all the chance I have of getting it. It was a staggering sum. The cattle you sold today, $35. Enough to buy supplies to get us through winter, but nowhere near enough to save the ranch. Eli's shoulders sagged. I knew it was coming. I've known for months, but I kept hoping something would change, that I'd find a way. For June's sake. This is her home. The only place she has memories of her mother. Then we'll find a way, Abigail said firmly. We? Eli looked at her. Abigail, this isn't your fight. You've already done more than anyone had a right to ask. If things get worse, if Thornton's men come back, you should leave. Go somewhere safe. Where would that be? She laughed bitterly. I've spent my whole life running from places that weren't safe. I'm tired of running, Eli. I'm tired of letting bullies and bigots decide where I get to exist. She straightened her shoulders. You gave me a place when I had nowhere to go. You trusted me with your daughter. The least I can do is stand with you when trouble comes. Trouble is definitely coming. Then let it come. Abigail's eyes flashed. I'm done being afraid. Eli stared at her, something like awe in his expression. You mean that? Every word. The cabin door burst open and June flew out, launching herself at her father. Papa, you're home. Did you bring supplies? Did you get sugar? Miss Abby said we could make cookies if we had sugar. Eli caught his daughter, holding her tight. Over her head, his eyes met Abigail's. I got sugar, he said softly, and flour and beans and everything else we need. Then I guess we're making cookies, Abigail said, managing a smile despite the fear still thrumming through her veins. They unloaded the wagon together, Eli carrying the heavy sacks while Abigail and June handled the smaller packages. It felt domestic, normal, like they were a family preparing for winter rather than people under siege. But Abigail could see the tension in Eli's shoulders, could see the way his eyes kept scanning the tree line, watching for threats. That night, after June was asleep and the cookies were cooling on the table, Eli and Abigail sat by the fire. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken things. Tell me about today, Abigail said finally. In town, what happened? Eli's hands tightened around his coffee mug. The usual, people crossing the street to avoid me, merchants who suddenly can't find the supplies I need. The banker making it clear he won't extend my mortgage again. He paused. And Marcus Thornton himself making another offer on the land, lower than the last one because he knows I'm desperate. What did you tell him? What I always tell him. No. Eli looked at her. This land is all June has left of her mother. Weena and I built this place with our own hands, made it into something beautiful and real. I won't sell it. Not to Thornton, not to anyone. Even if it means losing everything? Even then. His voice was fierce, uncompromising. Some things matter more than survival. Abigail understood. She'd made similar choices herself, holding on to her dignity when it would have been easier to surrender it, refusing to compromise who she was, even when the cost was high. Then we fight, she said simply. We find a way to get that money, and we fight. Abigail, no. She cut him off. I'm not leaving. I'm not running. June needs this home. You need this home. And maybe, her voice cracked slightly, maybe I need it too. The admission hung in the air between them. Eli looked at her, really looked at her, and Abigail saw him seeing her, not as a temporary worker, not as a stranger doing him a favor, but as someone who belonged here, someone who had a stake in this fight. All right, he said finally. We fight. Together. Together, Abigail agreed. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, reminding them that winter was coming, and with it, the deadline that hung over everything. But for now, in this moment, they were together. They were united. And somehow, that made the impossible seem just slightly less so. We should get some sleep, Eli said, standing. Tomorrow's going to be a hard day. They're all hard days, Abigail pointed out. Yeah, he smiled slightly, but at least now I'm not facing them alone. He headed toward his room, then paused at the door. Abigail? What you did today, standing up to those men, that took real courage. Or real stupidity. No. His voice was firm. Courage. Weena would have done the same thing. She never backed down from a fight, never let anyone make her feel small. He paused. You remind me of her sometimes. Same fire. Same refusal to accept that the world gets to decide your worth. The comparison made Abigail's throat tight. Thank you, she managed. That means more than you know. Eli nodded once, then disappeared into his room. Abigail sat by the fire a while longer, thinking about everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago, she'd been standing on a train platform, alone and unwanted and convinced she had nothing left to lose. Now she was here, in this cabin, part of something that felt dangerously close to family, part of something worth fighting for. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was everything she'd wanted and everything she'd been afraid to hope for. She finally rose and headed to her own room, pausing to peek in on June. The child was fast asleep, her golden curls spread across the pillow, one hand clutching the small doll Eli had bought her in town. She looked peaceful, innocent, unaware of the threats gathering around them. I won't let them hurt you, Abigail whispered to the sleeping child. I won't let them take your home. I promise. It was a promise she had no idea how to keep, but she meant it with every fiber of her being. The next days fell into a new pattern, one shaped by urgency and the knowledge that time was running out. Eli worked longer hours, trying to squeeze every possible dollar from the ranch. Abigail threw herself into finding ways to contribute, making soap to sell in town, sewing clothes for other families, even offering her healing services to anyone who would accept them. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. 3 weeks into Abigail's stay, as November deepened and the first real snow began to fall, Eli sat at the table with his account book spread before him. Abigail could see the numbers even from across the room, could see how they didn't add up no matter how he tried to make them. We're not going to make it, he said finally, his voice hollow. Even if I sold every head of cattle, every horse, everything we own, it wouldn't be enough. Abigail's mind raced, searching for solutions. What about borrowing from someone, a friend maybe, or I don't have friends with that kind of money, and the ones who do, he shook his head. They're not willing to loan it to someone like me. Someone like you, Abigail repeated bitterly. You mean someone who married a Comanche woman and refuses to apologize for it? Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. June was outside, playing in the first snow, her laughter drifting through the window. Abigail watched her, this child who'd claimed her heart without asking permission, and felt desperation claw at her chest. "There has to be a way," she said. "There has to be something we haven't thought of. If there is, I can't see it." Eli closed the account book with a soft thud. "Maybe I should take Thornton's offer. At least that way June and I would have enough money to start over somewhere else, somewhere people might be less hostile." "You don't believe that." Abigail turned to face him. "There is no somewhere else. Bigotry exists everywhere. Running won't solve anything." "Maybe not, but at least June would have a roof over her head and food in her belly." "She has that here." "For how long?" Eli's voice rose, frustration and fear bleeding through. "Until December, when the bank takes everything? Until Thornton's men decide talking isn't working and resort to more direct methods? Until—" He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "I can't protect her here, Abigail. I can barely protect myself." "So you'll give up? You'll let them win?" "I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic." He stood, pacing. "You've been here less than a month. You don't know how hard this has been, how long I've been fighting this fight. I'm tired, Abigail. I'm so damn tired." She could see it in every line of his body. The exhaustion, the defeat, the weight of trying to hold everything together alone for too long. Her heart ached for him, but she also felt anger rising. Anger at a world that punished people for daring to love across boundaries, that destroyed families because they didn't fit into neat, acceptable categories. "Eli," she said quietly, moving to stand in front of him. "Look at me." He did, and she saw the pain in his eyes, raw and unguarded. "I know you're tired. I know you've been fighting alone for too long, but you're not alone anymore." She reached out, taking his hands in hers. They were rough, calloused, scarred from work and worry. "I'm here. I'm standing with you, and I'm not going anywhere." "You can't promise that." "Yes, I can." Her voice was fierce. "I spent my whole life being pushed from place to place, never belonging anywhere, never being wanted. And then I came here, and June asked if I could be her mommy, and you treated me like I was worth something. And—" her voice cracked. "And for the first time in my entire life, I feel like I've found somewhere I belong. I'm not giving that up without a fight." Eli stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "Abigail." "No, let me finish." She squeezed his hands. "I know we started as strangers. I know this was supposed to be temporary, just a place to stay while I figured out my next move. But it's become more than that. June has become more than that. You've become—" She stopped, uncertain how to finish that sentence. "More," Eli finished softly. "You've become more to us too." The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to fully examine, but it was there, real and undeniable. A sound made them both turn. June stood in the doorway, snow dusting her hair and coat, her eyes wide and frightened. "Are you leaving, Miss Abby?" Her voice was small, scared. "Papa said the bank is taking our house. Does that mean you have to go away?" Abigail's heart shattered. She released Eli's hands and knelt down, opening her arms. June ran to her, and Abigail held the child close, feeling her small body trembling. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "Do you hear me, June? I'm not leaving you." "But Papa said—" "Your Papa is worried and scared and trying to protect you." Abigail pulled back slightly, looking into June's tear-bright eyes. "But we're going to figure this out, all of us together. We're family now, and families don't give up on each other." "Are we really family?" June's voice was hopeful, desperate. Abigail looked up at Eli, seeing her own emotions reflected in his face. "Yes," she said, the word feeling like a vow. "We really are." And in that moment, standing in that small cabin with snow falling outside and threats gathering in the darkness, something fundamental shifted. They weren't a rancher and a temporary worker and a child anymore. They were something else, something deeper. They were family, chosen, not born, forged not by blood but by need and care, and the simple decision to stand together against a world that wanted to tear them apart. Eli cleared his throat roughly. "All right then," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We fight. We figure this out somehow. We don't give up." "We don't give up," Abigail echoed. "Never ever?" June asked. "Never ever," they said together. But as Abigail held June close and met Eli's eyes over the child's head, she saw the same question she was asking herself. How? How did they fight an enemy with more money, more power, more support? How did they save a ranch when they didn't have the resources? How did they protect this fragile, precious thing they were building? She didn't know. But she knew she would die trying. Outside, the snow continued to fall, beautiful and deadly, covering everything in white. Winter was here. The deadline was approaching. And somewhere in the darkness, Marcus Thornton and his men were waiting for them to fail. But in the warm cabin, by the fire's light, a family held on to each other and refused to surrender. It wasn't much. But for now, it was enough. The promise they'd made to each other that snowy afternoon felt solid in the moment. But as the days crawled toward December, reality pressed in from all sides. Eli worked himself to exhaustion, rising before dawn and collapsing into bed long after dark. Abigail took on every task she could manage, her hands cracked and bleeding from the cold and the constant labor. And June, sensing the tension that hung over the household like a storm cloud, tried to be good, tried to help, tried not to ask questions about why Papa looked so worried all the time. They were surviving. Barely. But surviving wasn't the same as winning, and they all knew it. 2 weeks before the mortgage was due, Abigail made a decision. She waited until Eli had gone out to check the cattle, and June was occupied with her lessons. Then she changed into her best dress, the one she'd packed for meeting Samuel Garrett, the one she'd thought would be her wedding dress. It was worn now, the hem muddy from Montana roads, but it was still the finest thing she owned. She braided her hair carefully, pinned it up in the style white women preferred, and studied herself in the small mirror. Her reflection showed a woman who looked tired, older than her 26 years, but determined. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. "June," she called, "I need to go into town. Will you be all right here for a few hours?" June looked up from her slate, her eyes widening. "Town. But Papa says—" "I know what your Papa says, but I need to do this." Abigail knelt beside the child. "I'll be back before he even knows I'm gone. Can you keep this our secret for just a little while?" June bit her lip, clearly torn. "You're not leaving, are you? You promised you wouldn't leave." "I'm not leaving, I swear it." Abigail pulled the child into a quick hug. "I'm trying to help. Trust me?" "I trust you," June whispered, "but be careful. Town people are mean." "I know, sweetheart. I'll be careful." Abigail took the smaller wagon and one of the horses, handling the reins with more confidence than she felt. The ride into Timber Ridge took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of cold wind and second-guessing and fear that felt like ice in her stomach. But she kept going because she had to. Because sitting and waiting for disaster wasn't in her nature, and she'd be damned if she let this family lose everything without trying every possible option. Timber Ridge was bigger than she'd expected. A proper town with a main street, several shops, a hotel, 2 saloons, and a church whose white steeple pointed accusingly at the sky. People moved along the wooden sidewalks, bundled against the cold, going about their business. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their prejudice was destroying a family. Abigail pulled the wagon up in front of the bank, a solid brick building that screamed permanence and authority. She climbed down, her legs shaking slightly, and forced herself to walk through the door with her head high. The interior was all dark wood and brass fixtures designed to intimidate. A young clerk looked up from behind a counter, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to something colder when he got a good look at her. "Can I help you?" The question was polite, but barely. "I'm here to see the bank manager." Abigail kept her voice steady. "Regarding the Harper Ranch account." The clerk's eyes narrowed. "You're with Harper?" "I am." "Mr. Dalton doesn't see just anyone who walks in off the street." "Then it's fortunate I'm not just anyone." Abigail met his gaze without flinching. "Please inform Mr. Dalton that Miss Abigail Cross wishes to discuss a business matter of some urgency." The clerk looked like he wanted to refuse, but something in Abigail's bearing made him hesitate. Finally, he disappeared through a door marked private. Abigail waited, her heart hammering, her hands clenched in her skirts to hide their trembling. The clerk returned a moment later, looking surprised. "Mr. Dalton will see you. 5 minutes." Abigail followed him through the door into an office that reeked of cigar smoke and self-importance. Behind a massive desk sat a man in his 50s, well-fed and well-dressed, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once but had gone soft with comfortable living. "Miss Cross." Mr. Dalton didn't stand, didn't offer his hand. "You have 5 minutes. What business could you possibly have with this bank?" Abigail remained standing, refusing to be diminished. "I'm here about the Harper mortgage. I understand it's due in 2 weeks." "That's between this bank and Mr. Harper." Dalton leaned back in his chair. "I don't discuss clients' accounts with random women who claim association. I'm not random. I work at the ranch. I manage the household." She kept her voice level, professional. "And I'm here to discuss payment arrangements." Dalton's eyebrows rose. "Payment arrangements? Is Harper sending women to do his negotiating now? That's a new low, even for him." Abigail ignored the insult. "Mr. Harper doesn't know I'm here. I came on my own initiative because I believe there may be options that haven't been explored." "There are no options." Dalton's voice was flat. "The mortgage is $240. It's due December 15th. If it's not paid in full, the bank will foreclose. Very simple." "What if we could pay half now, and the rest over time? With interest, of course." "This bank doesn't make deals with people who can't honor their commitments." "Mr. Harper has honored every commitment until his wife died and the town made it impossible for him to hire help." Abigail's voice sharpened despite her efforts to stay calm. "His financial trouble isn't due to poor management. It's due to systematic persecution by people who didn't approve of his marriage." Dalton's face darkened. "Watch your tone, Miss Cross. You're in no position to make accusations." "I'm not making accusations. I'm stating facts." She took a breath, trying to regain her composure. "Mr. Dalton, I'm asking you, as one human being to another, to show some compassion. There's a child involved, a little girl who's already lost her mother. Don't make her lose her home, too. If the child's father can't provide for her, perhaps she'd be better off in other circumstances." Dalton shuffled some papers on his desk, dismissive. "I hear the orphanage in Helena is adequate." Rage flooded through Abigail, white-hot and barely controlled. "You would take a child from her father? A loving father who's doing everything in his power to keep his family together?" "I would enforce a legal contract that Harper signed of his own free will." Dalton looked at her coldly. "Now, unless you have $240 in your pocket, I suggest you leave. Your 5 minutes are up." Abigail knew she should leave, knew she was accomplishing nothing except making things worse. But the injustice of it, the casual cruelty, the way this comfortable man could destroy a family without a second thought, it was too much. "You know what I think, Mr. Dalton?" Her voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. "I think this has nothing to do with money. Marcus Thornton wants that land, and you're helping him get it. You're using the mortgage as a weapon to drive the Harpers out so your friend can buy their property for nothing." Dalton's face went red. "That's a serious accusation." "Then deny it." "I don't have to deny anything to you." He stood, his bulk imposing behind the desk. "Get out of my bank. And tell Harper that if he sends a half-breed woman to plead his case again, I'll add another month's interest to what he owes." The slur hit like a physical blow, but Abigail didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. "I'll leave," she said with dignity. "But know this, you haven't won. We're not giving up that ranch. We'll find a way." "You do that." Dalton's smile was cruel. "I'll enjoy watching you try." Abigail turned and walked out, her spine straight, her head high. She didn't let herself break until she was back in the wagon, reins in her shaking hands. Then she allowed herself one moment of despair, one moment where she pressed her face into her hands and let the tears come. She'd failed. Worse than failed. She'd probably made things harder for Eli, and she'd subjected herself to that man's contempt for nothing. "You all right, miss?" Abigail looked up to find a woman standing beside the wagon, older, maybe 60, with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She wore a simple dress and shawl, and something about her presence felt safe. "I'm fine," Abigail managed, wiping her eyes. "Thank you. You're the woman staying at the Harper place, aren't you? I've heard talk." The woman's voice was gentle, non-judgmental. "I'm Martha Brennan. My husband and I have a small farm east of here." Abigail Cross. She hesitated, then asked, What kind of talk have you heard? Martha smiled sadly. The usual small-town gossip, most of it ugly, most of it wrong. But I knew Weena Harper. She delivered my granddaughter when the doctor refused to come because we couldn't pay his fee up front. Her eyes grew distant with memory. Beautiful woman, brave woman, died too young. Abigail felt something loosen in her chest. You knew her? Not well, but enough to know she was good people. And Eli, too. He's a decent man trying to do right by his daughter in a town that won't let him. Martha glanced toward the bank. I'm guessing you just tried to talk sense into Dalton. How did you know? Because you've got that look, the one people get when they realize how cruel the world can be. Martha patted Abigail's hand. Don't take it personal, dear. Dalton's been in Thornton's pocket for years. He'll do whatever that man wants. So there's no hope, no way to stop the foreclosure. Martha was quiet for a moment. There might be one way. It's not conventional, and I don't know if you'd be willing to consider it. Hope flared in Abigail's chest. Tell me. There's a woman in Helena, Mrs. Catherine Ashworth. She runs a charity organization that helps families in crisis. Started it after her own husband died and left her with nothing. Martha lowered her voice. She's known for helping people the banks won't help. People who don't fit into neat categories. If you could get to her, explain the situation. Would she help someone like Eli, someone married to a Comanche woman? Catherine's daughter married a Chinese railroad worker. She knows what it's like when the world decides your family isn't acceptable. Martha squeezed Abigail's hand. I can't promise anything, but it's worth trying. Abigail's mind raced. Helena was 2 days' travel by stage. 2 days there, time to make her case, 2 days back. She'd be gone almost a week, maybe more. Could she leave Eli and June that long? Could she afford not to try? Thank you, she said to Martha, meaning it with her whole heart. Thank you for telling me. Thank Weena. She helped my family when we needed it. This is just me paying that kindness forward. Martha stepped back. You better get going before you draw more attention. And Miss Cross, be careful. Thornton doesn't like people interfering with his plans. Abigail nodded and urged the horse forward, her mind churning with possibilities. She'd have to tell Eli, of course. Couldn't just disappear for a week. But would he let her go? Would he see it as foolish hope or worth trying? She was so deep in thought that she didn't notice the 3 riders until they blocked her path. Her heart sank when she recognized them. The same men who'd come to the ranch, led by the scarred man whose name she still didn't know. Well, well, Scarface grinned, showing yellowed teeth. Harper's squaw, out all alone. That's not very smart. Abigail kept her voice steady. Get out of my way. Or what? You going to shoot us here in town? He laughed. Where's your rifle now, sweetheart? The other 2 men circled around, effectively trapping the wagon. Abigail's pulse raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. They were on the main street. People were watching. They wouldn't dare. Boys, I think we should have a conversation with the lady, Scarface dismounted, about her future prospects, about how staying at the Harper place might not be in her best interest. Don't touch me. Abigail's hand moved to the small knife she kept tucked in her boot, the one her mother had given her, bone-handled and sharp. Wouldn't dream of it. But Scarface moved closer, close enough that Abigail could smell whiskey on his breath. Just want to give you some friendly advice. You're a pretty woman, even with that mudblood thing going on. You could find work elsewhere. Better work than scrubbing floors for a man who's about to lose everything. I said get away from me. Or maybe you're not just working there. Scarface's grin turned ugly. Maybe you're keeping Harper's bed warm. That it? You like white men who've got a taste for savages? Abigail's knife was in her hand before she consciously decided to draw it. She pressed the blade against Scarface's throat, just hard enough to break skin. Back up, she said coldly. Now. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Scarface laughed, actually laughed, even as a thin line of blood trickled down his neck. You've got fire. I'll give you that. He stepped back slowly, hands raised. But fire burns out eventually, remember that. The 3 men moved aside, letting the wagon pass. Abigail didn't look back, didn't let them see her fear. She kept the horse at a steady pace through town and only urged it faster once she'd cleared the last building. By the time she reached the ranch, she was shaking so hard she could barely climb down from the wagon. Eli was in the yard, and his face went white when he saw her. What happened? He was at her side instantly, his hands on her arms, steadying her. Abigail, you're pale as death. What? His eyes found the knife still clutched in her hand, saw the way she was trembling. Did someone hurt you? I'm fine. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I went to town, to the bank, to try to talk to Dalton about the mortgage. Eli's expression shifted from concern to something darker. You did what? I tried to help. I thought maybe you had no right. His voice was low, dangerous. That's my debt, my problem. You had no right to go behind my back. I wasn't going behind your back. I was trying to find a solution. Abigail pulled away from him. Someone had to do something besides sit here watching the days count down. So you went to town, alone, exposed yourself to... He gestured at her, at the knife, at her obvious distress. What happened? Tell me everything. So she did. She told him about Dalton's refusal, about the cruel suggestion that June would be better off in an orphanage, about Martha Brennan and the woman in Helena who might help. She told him about Thornton's men, about the confrontation, about the knife and the threat. By the time she finished, Eli's jaw was clenched so tight she thought he might crack his teeth. You could have been killed, he said, each word forced out. You could have been hurt or worse, and I wouldn't have even known where you were. But I wasn't. I'm fine. This time, he ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling with his temper. Abigail, I appreciate what you tried to do, but you can't. You can't put yourself at risk like that. Not for me. Not for this ranch. Why not? She felt her own anger rising. You put yourself at risk every day. You work yourself to exhaustion. You face those men's threats. You endure this town's hatred. Why am I not allowed to fight too? Because... He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. Because I couldn't bear it if something happened to you. All right? Is that what you want to hear? I already lost Weena. I can't lose you too. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Abigail stared at him, seeing in his eyes everything he wasn't saying, the fear, the growing feelings he'd been trying to ignore, the way she'd become essential to his life in just a few short weeks. Eli, she said softly, I'm not Weena. I'm not going to break that easily. Everyone breaks eventually. His voice was rough. This territory, this life, grinds people down until there's nothing left. Then we'll break together. She reached for his hand. But not today, because Martha Brennan gave me hope. This woman in Helena, this Mrs. Ashworth, she might help us. It's a long shot, but it's something. Helena is 2 days away. I know. You'd have to take the stage. Be gone almost a week. I know that too. Eli looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. You'd do that? Travel alone, go to a strange city, ask for help from a woman you've never met? For June? For this family? Abigail squeezed his hand. In a heartbeat. Something shifted in Eli's expression, resistance giving way to acceptance, fear giving way to trust. All right, he said finally. But you don't go alone. June and I will come with you. Eli, you can't leave the ranch for that long. The cattle can survive a few days. My neighbor Rollins owes me a favor. He'll keep an eye on things. Eli's voice was firm. If we're going to do this, we do it together, as a family. The word family sent warmth flooding through Abigail's chest. Together, she agreed. They were so focused on each other that neither of them heard June approach until her small voice broke the moment. Are we going on an adventure? Eli looked down at his daughter, and despite everything, he smiled. Yeah, baby girl, we're going on an adventure. To save our house? To save our house, Abigail confirmed, kneeling down to June's level. It's going to be a long trip, and it might be hard. But we're going to try. June threw her arms around Abigail's neck. I knew you wouldn't let them take our home. I knew it. Over the child's head, Abigail met Eli's eyes. In them, she saw gratitude and fear and something else. Something that looked dangerously like love. Not the passionate, consuming love of poems and stories, but something steadier, deeper. The The kind of love built on shared struggle and mutual respect, and the simple decision to keep showing up for each other. That night, after June was asleep, they sat together planning the trip. Eli counted out what little money they had, barely enough for stage fare and a couple nights lodging. It would have to be enough. "We leave day after tomorrow," Eli said. "That gives us time to make arrangements, talk to Rollins, pack what we need." "What do we tell June?" "The truth, that we're going to ask for help, and we don't know if it will work, but we're trying." He looked at Abigail. "She's stronger than people think. She can handle the truth." "She's your daughter. Of course she's strong." Eli smiled slightly. "She's becoming your daughter, too." The word should have scared Abigail, should have made her want to run, to protect herself from caring too much about people she might lose, but instead they just felt right. True. "Yeah," she said softly. "I guess she is." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere in the darkness, the future waited. Uncertain, dangerous, full of possibilities both terrible and wonderful. "Abigail?" Eli's voice was quiet. "Earlier today, when you pulled a knife on those men, were you scared?" "Terrified. But you did it anyway. Doing things afraid is better than not doing them at all." She looked at him. "You taught me that. Watching you fight for this place, for June, even when the odds are impossible. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. It doesn't feel brave. It feels desperate. Maybe that's what bravery is. Doing what needs to be done even when you're desperate and scared and not sure you'll survive it." She paused. "We're all desperate here, Eli. But we're desperate together. That has to count for something. It counts for everything." He reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. The gesture was intimate, familiar, like something they'd been doing for years instead of just weeks. "When this is over, when we either save the ranch or lose it, there's something I need to tell you, something I've been afraid to say." Abigail's heart hammered. "Tell me now." "No." He shook his head. "Not until we know which way this goes. It wouldn't be fair to either of us." She wanted to argue, wanted to demand he finish what he'd started. But she also understood. They were standing on a precipice, and making promises or declarations before they knew if they'd survive the fall felt like tempting fate. "After," she agreed. "When we know." "When we know," he echoed. They sat a while longer, hands joined, watching the fire die. Tomorrow they would tell June, would start preparing for the journey. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But for now, in this quiet moment, they were just two people holding on to each other in the darkness, hoping that together they were strong enough to weather whatever came next. The morning of their departure dawned cold and clear. Eli hitched the wagon and drove them into Timber Ridge to catch the Helena stage. The town was bustling with Saturday activity, and Abigail felt eyes on them as they moved through the streets. Curious, hostile, judgmental eyes that saw a white man, a half-breed woman, and a child who didn't fit into neat categories. "Let them look," Abigail thought fiercely. "Let them judge. We're still here. We're still fighting." The stage depot was crowded, people coming and going, heading to Helena or Virginia City or points beyond. Eli bought their tickets, and they settled in to wait, June perched between them on the wooden bench. "Miss Abby," June whispered, tugging on Abigail's sleeve. "That man is staring at us." Abigail followed the child's gaze and felt her stomach drop. Marcus Thornton stood across the depot, flanked by two well-dressed men who looked like lawyers or businessmen. He was everything she'd expected, tall, imposing, with silver hair and the kind of face that commanded respect. He was also staring directly at them with an expression of cold calculation. "Don't look at him," Eli murmured. Just ignore him." But ignoring Marcus Thornton proved impossible, because a moment later he crossed the depot and stood before them. Up close, he was even more imposing, his presence commanding attention despite his quiet voice. "Eli Harper." Thornton's tone was polite, almost friendly. "Heading out of town?" "Just a short trip." Eli's voice was carefully neutral. "Business in Helena." "Interesting timing, with your mortgage due in less than 2 weeks." Thornton's gaze moved to Abigail, assessing her with the cold efficiency of a man used to evaluating assets. "You must be the woman I've heard about." Miss Cross, is it? Abigail lifted her chin. I am. I understand you've been making inquiries, asking questions, seeking solutions. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Commendable initiative, though ultimately futile. We'll see about that, Abigail said quietly. Thornton chuckled. I admire your spirit, truly. But you should understand something, all of you. His voice dropped, became harder. That land has been earmarked for my expansion plans for years. I've been patient, more patient than most men would be, but my patience has limits. The land is mine, Eli said, his voice dangerous. Legally purchased, legally held. You have no claim to it. Yet. Thornton's smile widened. But in 11 days, when you can't pay your mortgage, that will change. And I'll be there with cash in hand to purchase it from the bank. Everything you built with your wife. The pause before wife was deliberate, insulting. It will be mine. June pressed closer to Abigail, her small body trembling. Abigail wrapped an arm around the child, fury burning in her chest. You should consider my offer, Harper. Seriously consider it. Thornton pulled an envelope from his coat. 10% more than the mortgage amount. Enough to start over somewhere else. Somewhere more suitable for your circumstances. Eli didn't take the envelope. Not interested. Think of your daughter. Thornton's gaze moved to June. Pretty little thing. Be a shame if she grew up watching her father fail, watching everything he built turn to dust because of his stubbornness. Don't talk about my daughter. Eli's voice was deadly quiet. Don't even look at her. Helena's stage now boarding, the depot agent called out, breaking the tension. Thornton stepped back, tucking the envelope away. Enjoy your trip, Harper, but know this. Whether you go to Helena or not, whether you find some benefactor or not, the outcome is inevitable. In 11 days, that ranch becomes mine. He tipped his hat mockingly. Have a safe journey. He walked away, his men following like trained dogs. Abigail felt Eli trembling beside her, saw the way his hands clenched into fists. Papa? June's voice was small, scared. Is that man going to take our house? Eli knelt down, taking his daughter's face in his hands. Not if we have anything to say about it, baby girl. That man might be rich and powerful, but he doesn't know what he's up against. He doesn't know that we're fighters, that we don't give up. Because we're family, June said, her voice gaining strength. And families stick together. That's right. Eli pulled her into a hug, then stood and took her hand. Come on, let's go to Helena and show Mr. Thornton exactly what this family is made of. They boarded the stage, finding seats in the crowded interior. As the coach lurched into motion, Abigail looked back at Timber Ridge, at the town that had rejected them, at Marcus Thornton standing in the depot watching them leave. She didn't know if their plan would work, didn't know if Mrs. Ashworth would even see them, much less help them. But she knew they had to try. Had to fight with everything they had, because the alternative, giving up, letting Thornton win, losing the home they'd built together, was unthinkable. Beside her, June had fallen asleep against Eli's shoulder, exhausted from the emotional morning. Eli met Abigail's eyes over his daughter's head, and in his gaze she saw her own determination reflected back. We're going to win, she said quietly. We have to. Yeah, Eli agreed. We do. The stage rolled on toward Helena, carrying with it a family's last hope, a desperate gamble, and the faint, fragile possibility that sometimes the world allowed good people to triumph over powerful ones. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. And sometimes, Abigail thought as the Montana landscape rushed past the window, a long shot was enough. The journey to Helena took 2 grueling days of bone-rattling travel, cramped quarters, and the constant awareness that every hour brought them closer to either salvation or ruin. June bore it with remarkable resilience, entertaining herself with stories Abigail told her, and pressing her face to the window to watch the landscape transform from familiar ranch country to the bustling approaches of Montana's territorial capital. Helena sprawled across a gulch in the Rocky Mountains, a city born from gold strikes and now grown into something more permanent. Buildings of brick and stone replaced the rough wood structures of smaller towns, and the streets teemed with a diversity Abigail hadn't seen since leaving St. Louis. Chinese merchants, European immigrants, black freedmen, native traders, all moving through the city with purpose. It's so big, June whispered, her eyes wide as the stage rolled down the main thoroughfare. Are we really going to find one lady in all this? We're going to try, Eli said, though Abigail could hear the uncertainty beneath his words. They had an address from Martha Brennan, written on a scrap of paper that Abigail had guarded like precious cargo. But would Mrs. Catherine Ashworth even see them? Would she care about the struggles of strangers from a ranch she'd never heard of? They found a modest boarding house that wouldn't break their meager budget and took a single room with 2 beds, one for June, one that Abigail and Eli would have to share, a necessity born of poverty rather than impropriety. The landlady, a practical German woman named Mrs. Holst, took their money without comment on their unusual family arrangement, for which Abigail was grateful. We'll go first thing in the morning, Eli said as they settled June into bed that night. The child was exhausted from travel, her eyes already drooping. Give ourselves the full day to make our case. Abigail nodded, though anxiety churned in her stomach. Everything depended on tomorrow. Everything hung on the words they'd say, the impression they'd make, the mercy of a woman who had no obligation to help them. That night, as June slept between them, Eli having insisted on propriety despite the practicalities, Abigail lay awake staring at the ceiling. Beside her, she could hear Eli's breathing, could sense that he too was awake, both of them caught in the terrible space between hope and despair. Abigail? His voice was barely a whisper. Yes? If this doesn't work, if we go back empty-handed and lose the ranch, he paused. What will you do? The question hung heavy in the darkness. I don't know, she admitted. A month ago, I would have said I'd move on, find another town, another opportunity, keep drifting the way I always have. She turned her head to look at his silhouette in the dim light filtering through the curtains. But now I can't imagine leaving. Can't imagine not being there when June wakes up, not sharing coffee with you at dawn, not being part of this family we've built. Her voice cracked slightly. I know that's foolish. I know I should protect myself, keep some distance in case everything falls apart. But I can't, Eli. I've already fallen too far. She heard him shift, felt him turn toward her. In the darkness, his hand found hers across June's sleeping form. I'm glad, he said quietly, because I've fallen too. Further than I thought possible, further than I should have let myself. You came into our lives like some kind of miracle. And now I can't remember what it was like before you were here. Eli, let me finish. His grip tightened on her hand. I said I'd wait until we knew how this turned out before I spoke. But lying here in the dark, not knowing what tomorrow brings, I need you to know. I love you, Abigail Cross. Not the way I loved Weena. That was something different, something that belonged to who I was then. This is new, unexpected, built on different ground. But it's real. It's, I love you too. The words rushed out of Abigail before she could stop them, before she could calculate the risk or protect herself from potential hurt. I've loved you for weeks, maybe from that first night when you could have left me on that platform but didn't, when you looked at me and saw a person worth saving. They couldn't kiss, not with June between them, not in a room that wasn't truly theirs, but they held hands across the small distance, fingers intertwined, and it felt like a promise, like a vow more binding than any spoken in a church. Whatever happens tomorrow, Eli whispered, we face it together. Together, Abigail echoed. Always. Morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. They dressed carefully, Abigail in her best dress despite its wear, Eli in his cleanest shirt and jacket. June wore the dress Abigail had mended, her golden curls brushed until they shone. They looked like what they were, working people trying desperately to appear respectable, to convince someone that they were worth the risk of helping. The address Martha had given them led to a substantial brick house on the western edge of Helena, surrounded by a neat garden gone dormant for winter. A brass plaque beside the door read, Montana Women's Aid Society, Catherine Ashworth, Director. Eli knocked, his jaw tight with tension. A moment later, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s, dressed practically with her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked them up and down with sharp, assessing eyes. We don't accept walk-ins, she said crisply. If you need assistance, you must write first, explain your circumstances, and wait for an appointment. Please, Abigail said before the woman could close the door. We've traveled 2 days from Timber Ridge. We have nowhere else to turn. 5 minutes of Mrs. Ashworth's time, that's all we're asking. The woman's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Ashworth sees a dozen desperate cases every week. She can't help everyone. We know. Eli spoke up, his voice steady despite the fear Abigail knew he felt. But we have to try. For my daughter. He placed a hand on June's shoulder. She's already lost her mother. I can't let her lose her home too. The woman looked down at June, and something in her face shifted. Wait here, she said finally, and disappeared into the house. They waited in the cold, June pressed against Abigail's side, Eli's hand on Abigail's back, a small gesture of support that steadied her racing heart. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, the door opened again. Mrs. Ashworth will give you 10 minutes, the woman said. Don't waste them. They followed her through a house that spoke of comfortable means, not wealthy, but secure. Books lined the walls, papers covered a large desk, and the whole place had the air of serious work being done. In a sitting room warmed by a fire, a woman rose to greet them. Catherine Ashworth was perhaps 50, with gray-streaked dark hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering to be easily shocked. She wore a simple but well-made dress, and there was something in her bearing that commanded respect without demanding it. Mr. Harper, she said, her voice cultured but not cold. Miss Cross, and this must be June, she gestured to chairs. Please, sit. You have 10 minutes. Use them wisely. Eli started to speak, but Abigail found herself interrupting. Mrs. Ashworth, I know you must hear desperate stories every day. I know everyone who comes through that door thinks their situation is unique, that they deserve special consideration. But I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending our case is special. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. Go on. We're three people who don't fit into the neat categories this world prefers, Abigail continued, her words coming faster now. Eli married a Comanche woman and loved her until fever took her. June is growing up caught between two worlds, just like I did. And I'm a mixed-blood woman who's been rejected more times than I can count. She leaned forward. The town where Eli's ranch is located wants him gone. They're using his mortgage as a weapon. He owes $240, due in 9 days, and if he can't pay, a man named Marcus Thornton will buy the land from the bank and destroy everything Eli built with his wife. And you want me to loan you this money? Catherine's tone was neutral, revealing nothing. We want a chance, Eli said. A fighting chance to keep our home. I can pay you back. It might take years, but I will. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that families like ours deserve to exist, deserve to thrive, deserve to not be crushed by people who think we're beneath them. Catherine was silent for a long moment, studying them. Then her gaze moved to June. Child, come here, please. June glanced at Abigail, who nodded encouragingly. The little girl approached Catherine, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Tell me about your mother, Catherine said gently. June's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. Mama was beautiful and brave, and she knew all about plants and healing. She used to sing to me in Comanche and tell me stories about how the world was made. She taught me that being different wasn't bad. It was special. A tear rolled down her cheek, and then she got sick and died, and everything got harder. But then Miss Abby came, and she knows the same things Mama knew, and she teaches me and loves me, and her voice broke. And I don't want to lose another Mama. Please don't let them take our home. Please. Catherine's expression cracked, just slightly, and Abigail saw her blink rapidly. The older woman reached out and gently wiped June's tear away. You may return to your father, child. June ran back to Eli, who pulled her onto his lap and held her close. Catherine stood and walked to the window, her back to them, silent for so long that Abigail felt hope beginning to die. Finally, Catherine spoke. My daughter married a Chinese man, a good man, intelligent and hard-working, who loved her desperately. They had 2 beautiful children. She turned to face them, her eyes bright with old pain. 5 years ago, a mob in Virginia City decided that Chinese families weren't welcome. They burned my daughter's home. Her husband tried to protect them. Her voice went flat. He died. My daughter survived, barely, but she lost everything, her home, her husband, nearly her own life. The men who did it were never punished. The room was absolutely silent except for the crackling of the fire. I started this organization because I couldn't save my daughter's family, Catherine continued, but perhaps I can save others. Perhaps I can create a world where families like yours, like mine, have a fighting chance. She returned to her desk, pulled out paper and pen. I will loan you the $240, interest-free for the first year, then 5% annually thereafter. You'll sign a contract agreeing to repay the loan over 10 years, with provisions for hardship should you need them. Abigail's breath caught. Beside her, Eli had gone absolutely still. However, Catherine continued, her voice firm, I want something in return beyond repayment. I want you to succeed, Mr. Harper. I want your ranch to thrive. I want your daughter to grow up proud of who she is. And when you do succeed, not if, when, I want you to help the next family that needs it. I want you to pay this kindness forward so that the world becomes a little less hostile to people who don't fit its narrow definitions. We will, Eli said, his voice thick with emotion. I swear to you, we will. Catherine smiled then, a real smile that transformed her serious face. I know you will. That's why I'm helping you. She began writing. Now we need to move quickly. You said the mortgage is due in 9 days? December 15th, Abigail confirmed. Then we have time, but not much. Catherine wrote rapidly. I'll draw up the contract today. Have it witnessed and notarized. You'll need to stay in Helena at least 2 more days to handle the paperwork. Can you afford that? We'll manage, Eli said, though Abigail knew their funds were nearly exhausted. Catherine looked up, her eyes sharp. Don't be proud, Mr. Harper. Pride doesn't keep children fed. You'll stay here, in my guest rooms, while we complete the paperwork. And before you argue, consider it payment for the satisfaction I'll get from imagining Marcus Thornton's face when you walk into that bank with cash in hand. Despite everything, Abigail laughed, a sound that was half sob, half joy. June was grinning, bouncing in Eli's lap, and Eli himself looked like he couldn't quite believe this was real. Why? He asked quietly. Why would you do this for strangers? Catherine met his eyes. Because you're not strangers. You're what my daughter's family should have been allowed to be, people living their lives, raising a child, trying to make something good in the world. And because, her voice softened, because when I look at the 3 of you, I see love, real love, the kind that crosses boundaries and builds bridges. The world needs more of that, not less. The next 2 days passed in a blur of paperwork and planning. Catherine proved to be as efficient as she was generous, producing contracts, arranging for the money to be transferred, even writing a letter to the Timber Ridge bank manager that made it clear any attempt to refuse their payment would result in legal action. Dalton's a coward, Catherine said as she sealed the letter. He'll bluster, but he won't actually break the law. Not when he knows someone's watching. In the evenings, after June was asleep, the adults would gather in Catherine's sitting room. She'd tell them about her work, about the families she'd helped, about her vision for a Montana territory where people could live without fear of persecution for who they loved or where they came from. It's a long fight, she admitted. Most days I feel like I'm bailing water from a sinking ship. But then families like yours come along, and I remember why it matters. Every family saved is a victory. Every child who grows up proud of their heritage instead of ashamed is a revolution. On the morning of their departure, Catherine pressed an additional envelope into Abigail's hands. Emergency funds, she said firmly when Abigail tried to refuse. $50. Keep it hidden, use it only if you must, but know it's there. And write to me. I want to know how you're doing, how June is doing. You're part of my family now in a way. We survivors need to stick together. Abigail embraced her, this woman who'd saved them, who'd believed in them. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing us as worth saving. Thank you for being worth it, Catherine replied. The journey back to Timber Ridge felt different than the journey out. They carried with them hope made tangible, a bank draft that would save the ranch, contracts that proved someone believed in their future, and the knowledge that they weren't as alone as they'd thought. What do you think Thornton will do? Abigail asked as the stage rolled through familiar territory. When we pay the mortgage? Be furious, Eli said with dark satisfaction. Then probably try something else. Men like him don't give up easily. Neither do we, June piped up, earning a smile from both adults. Neither do we, Eli agreed, pulling his daughter close. They arrived back in Timber Ridge on December 14th, one day before the mortgage was due. Eli wanted to wait until the 15th, wanted to walk into that bank at the last possible moment and see Dalton's face when he realized his scheme had failed. But Abigail convinced him otherwise. Don't give them any excuse, she argued. Pay it early, pay it in full, and make it clear we're not going anywhere. So on the afternoon of the 14th, they walked into the bank, all three of them, a united front. The clerk's eyes widened when he saw them, and he scurried to fetch Mr. Dalton. The bank manager emerged from his office, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief when he saw the bank draft in Eli's hand. What is this? Payment in full for the Harper Ranch mortgage, Eli said, his voice carrying through the bank, plus 1 month's interest as penalty for early payment, per the contract terms. Dalton's face went through several shades of red. Where did you get this money? That's none of your concern. Eli laid the draft on the counter. Process the payment, mark the mortgage as satisfied, and provide me with a receipt. Today. I'll need to verify these funds. The draft is from the First Bank of Helena, Abigail interjected, producing Catherine's letter. Mrs. Catherine Ashworth has written to confirm its validity. I believe you know her reputation. Any attempt to delay or refuse this payment will be met with legal action. Dalton snatched the letter, read it, and went pale. Catherine Ashworth's name clearly carried weight even in Timber Ridge. This is highly irregular, he blustered. Process the payment, Eli repeated, steel in his voice. Now. It took an hour during which Dalton tried every possible delaying tactic, during which he sent a boy running to fetch Marcus Thornton, during which he called the draft into question and demanded additional verification. But Catherine had prepared them well, had armed them with documents and legal language and the confidence that they were in the right. By the time Marcus Thornton strode into the bank, his face dark with fury, the transaction was complete. Eli held the receipt that proved the mortgage was paid. The ranch was secure. They had won. You son of a bitch, Thornton snarled, not caring who heard. How did you, who? That's none of your business, Eli said calmly. My land is paid for. My debt is cleared. And if you or your men set foot on my property again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. He folded the receipt carefully, tucked it into his pocket. Come on, family. Let's go home. They walked out of that bank with their heads high, June between them holding both their hands. Behind them, they could hear Thornton shouting at Dalton, could imagine the scene unfolding. But they didn't look back. They climbed into the wagon and headed north, toward the ranch, toward home. The relief didn't fully hit until they were back on their land, the cabin visible through the trees, smoke rising from the chimney where their neighbor Rollins must have kept the fire going. Eli stopped the wagon and just sat there, staring at his home. The home he'd built with Weena, the home he'd nearly lost, the home he'd now saved. Papa? June's voice was uncertain. Are you all right? Yeah, baby girl. Eli's voice was rough. I'm more than all right. He turned to Abigail and she saw tears on his face. We did it. We actually did it. Abigail reached for his hand. We did it together. Together, he echoed, then laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. God, together. I'm so tired of doing things alone. You don't have to anymore, Abigail said softly. You have me. You have June. You have a family. Eli pulled her close then, right there in the wagon, and kissed her. It was their first kiss, long overdue, and it tasted like relief and joy and promise. June squealed with delight, bouncing between them. Does this mean Miss Abby gets to stay forever and ever? She asked. Eli pulled back slightly, his eyes on Abigail's face. That depends. Abigail Cross, will you stay? Not as a worker, not as someone passing through, but as... He seemed to struggle for words. As family, Abigail finished. As yours. Yes, Eli Harper. Yes, I'll stay. Forever and always. The winter that followed was hard. Winters in Montana always were. But the Harper Ranch survived, thrived even. Word spread about how they'd defeated Marcus Thornton, how they'd found help when everyone said there was none to be found. Some people in town remained hostile, but others started to soften. started to see that this family, different as it was, deserved to exist. Martha Brennan became a regular visitor, bringing news and gossip, and sometimes other families who needed help. True to their promise to Catherine, Eli and Abigail began quietly assisting those families, sharing what little they had, connecting them with resources, building a network of people who'd been rejected by conventional society but who found strength in each other. On a cold day in February, Eli and Abigail were married under the bare branches of a sycamore tree at the edge of the property. There was no preacher. No man of God would perform the ceremony for a white man marrying a mixed-blood woman. Instead, they spoke their own vows, witnessed by June and Martha and a handful of neighbors who didn't care what the church thought. "I used to be the bride no one chose," Abigail said, her hands clasped in Eli's, her heart full to bursting. "The woman everyone rejected. But today I choose you, Eli Harper. I choose June. I choose this life, this family, this love. And I'll keep choosing it every day for as long as I live." "I choose you too," Eli said, his voice strong and sure. "I choose this beautiful, brave woman who pulled a knife on 3 men to protect my daughter, who traveled to Helena to save our home, who looked at my broken family and decided we were worth fighting for." He smiled. "I choose you, Abigail Cross, today and always." They sealed their vows with a kiss, and June threw dried flowers in the air, laughing with pure joy. It wasn't a traditional wedding, it wasn't sanctioned by church or approved by society, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was enough. By spring, the ranch was thriving. Eli had hired 2 hands, men who'd been rejected by other ranches for various reasons, and who were grateful for work. The cattle grew fat on new grass, the garden exploded with growth under Abigail's careful tending, and June bloomed like a wildflower, growing taller and more confident every day. One warm evening in June, the month of her namesake, the little girl sat with Abigail in the garden, helping to harvest herbs. Her hands were more skilled now, her knowledge deeper. She could identify dozens of plants by sight, knew their uses, understood the sacred relationship between healer and medicine. "Miss Abby, Mama," June said, the words still new enough to make her smile. "Do you think my first mama knows about you? Do you think she's happy I have you now?" Abigail's throat tightened. "I think she knows," she said softly. "And I think she's very happy, because she loved you so much that she'd want you to have every bit of love possible." "I love having 2 mamas," June said matter-of-factly. "One who's in heaven and one who's here. Some kids don't even have one mama. I'm lucky." "We're all lucky," Abigail agreed, pulling the child into a hug. That night, after June was asleep, Abigail and Eli sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. She was pregnant, early still, barely showing, but the child within her was undeniable. Eli's hand rested on her still flat belly, protective and gentle. "A son," he said softly. "I can feel it. A son to carry on what we're building here." "Maybe," Abigail said, "or another daughter. Either way, they'll grow up knowing they're loved, knowing they belong, knowing their heritage, all of it, is something to be proud of." "Because of you," Eli said, "because you chose us when you could have kept running, because you stood and fought when it would have been easier to leave." "I didn't choose you because it was easy," Abigail corrected. "I chose you because for the first time in my life, I felt chosen back." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the night sounds of their land. Inside, June dreamed peaceful dreams. The cattle were safe in the fields, the mortgage was paid. Their future, while never certain, felt possible in a way it never had before. Abigail thought about the woman she'd been on that train platform, lost, rejected, convinced she had nothing left to offer the world. That woman had been broken by a lifetime of being unwanted, of being told she didn't fit, of carrying shame for circumstances beyond her control. But that woman was gone now, transformed by the simple act of a little girl asking if she could be her mother, transformed by a man who saw worth in her when others saw only complications, transformed by the decision to stop running and start fighting, to claim a place in the world instead of waiting for permission to exist. She wasn't unwanted anymore. She was chosen, treasured, loved. She was a wife, a mother, a healer, a fighter. She was part of something bigger than herself, a family built not on conventional foundations but on something stronger, on choice, on courage, on the radical act of loving across boundaries the world wanted to keep rigid. "What are you thinking about?" Eli asked, his thumb tracing circles on her belly. "That I'm home," Abigail said simply. "Finally, after all these years, I'm home." Eli pulled her closer, kissed her temple. "Yeah," he agreed. "We all are." The wind carried the scent of sage and pine, of growing things in wild spaces. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The ranch, their home, their hard-won victory, settled into the peaceful rhythms of night. And in that moment, under the vast Montana sky, Abigail Cross Harper understood a truth she'd spent her whole life searching for. Family wasn't something you were born into. It wasn't about blood or acceptance or fitting into preset categories. Family was something you built, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time, one decision to love at a time. She'd been the bride no one wanted, the woman everyone rejected, but she'd become the wife someone chose, the mother someone needed, the fighter someone believed in. And in becoming those things, she'd finally become herself, fully, completely, without shame or apology. The future stretched ahead, uncertain as futures always were. There would be more struggles, more prejudice to face, more battles to fight. Marcus Thornton wouldn't give up easily, and there would always be people who thought families like theirs had no right to exist. But they would face it all together, Eli with his quiet strength, June with her fierce spirit, and Abigail with the courage she'd discovered in herself. They would raise their children to be proud, would build their ranch into something lasting, would help other families find the same hope they'd found. They would prove, one day at a time, that love was stronger than hate, that family was what you made it, that belonging was something you claimed, not something you waited to be granted. And years later, when June was grown and bringing her own children to visit, when the ranch had expanded to include the neighboring property, when Abigail was known throughout the territory as a healer who never turned anyone away, she would look back on that cold November night when a little girl had whispered, "Can you be my mommy?" and know that every struggle, every rejection, every painful step of her journey had led her exactly where she needed to be. Home. Finally, forever, home.